Welcome everyone to Deep Drinks Podcast. It's been a long time. It feels like a long time. It's been a week, but it feels like I haven't seen you guys and your beautiful smiling faces for a long time. But I'm so glad to be back, and we're kicking off a new season on Deep Drinks here. The conversation you're about to hear started as a discussion between Kip and I privately about the inherent dishonesty of Christian apologetics. I had and Islam as well, but we didn't get into that. But I have beefs with that as well. I had a problem with the logic apologists were using online, and Kip had some big problems with the scholarship. When Kip and I discussed some of these problems, I realized how big the problems actually were. Not only do I believe apologists of apologetics of any kind should be scrutinized, but I believe that every one of them should be seen as used car salesmen. That is to say, that if you walk into a lot, they will always try and convince you to get one of their cars. The question of whether or not you need a car or if they have the best car for you and your family is irrelevant. They have made up their minds, and their job is no longer truth, honesty, discovery of facts, or open-mindedness. Their job is to get more people driving cars, especially their cars. It gets worse. I think that many apologists are willfully and knowingly deceiving their flock, making up false features, overemphasizing fuel economy, not mentioning the faulty brake pads, and hiding the rust. Dear deep drinkers, this episode is kicking off what I am calling the anti-apologetics arc, a season of Bible scholars and guests who call snake oil for what it is. If this is your first time watching Deep Drinks, I highly suggest you subscribe, because coming up we have some amazing, incredible guests that will be touching on these very subjects. I want to make one thing clear, however, before we dive into this. This isn't an atheist YouTube channel. This isn't, and I want to make things clear that I am by no means saying that but that there is no evidence for God, or no reason or people can't have faith in their God. Well, I'm just pointing out that the apologists online are being sneaky when they're trying to represent their faith. They are telling, when you listen to an apologist, they are telling you an unbalanced and dishonest and often dishonest perspective. So with all that said, I want to introduce my amazing guest to kick off this new arc, Dr. Kip Davis, who is a philologist and Hebrew Bible scholar who specializes in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Second Temple Judaism. He has expertise on ancient scribal practices. Dr. Kip received his PhD in religion and theology from Manchester University in 2009, and among many other things, you may recognize him from his PBS Nova documentary, Dead Sea Scrolls Detectives, which documented his part in discovering the forgeries in the Dead Sea Scrolls antiquity market. In preparation for today, Dr. Kip and I both read The Case for Christ, and Kip has some notes. Welcome to Deep Drinks, Kip Davis, Dr. Kip Davis. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm so happy you used the music, I have to say. That was
so I don't normally do like a custom introduction, but you asked, like, can we use that music? And that's a Christian band, right?
Yeah, man. So that is Trouble. They were one of the first Christian heavy metal bands. And as you can imagine, they probably they had trouble in the Christian music market because they wrote songs like "The Bastards Will Pay," and they had no problem saying the F word, and and I think they took a lot of shrooms too.
Oh,
So
well, they're fun. What a fun,
they were
yeah. What a fun
there.
Christians.
There was so when I was like when I was in high school, there was like an ongoing kind of debate. I mean, these guys are Christians, but they're. I mean, are they really Christians? But
Yeah.
so yeah, but I love them. They're amazing. So
I remember
yeah.
having conversations about fight pits at like youth conferences and stuff. Like the
Yeah.
metal bands would be up there before the praise and worship bands, and they'd be like, "Circle, make a circle," and like some of my leaders were like, "No, it's wrong," and I was like, "No, it's like showing the world that we can be fun too. Like, like it's just like, fun mosh pits, like." And yeah, we had big discussions about that back when I was in youth ministry. Guys, hit the like button, subscribe, favorite, send it to your fundamentalist auntie. This is going to be an awesome episode. But before we jump into it, what are we drinking? And I'm so excited.
Yeah. So I have to say, my plan was for my next appearance on Deep Drinks to drink Baijiu. But then you had this total poser on who wanted to drink Baijiu, and I'm like, damn it, no, I can't. So, but as much as I love Baijiu, and I'm just messing with you, Aaron. I love you. You're a good guy.
Yeah, Aaron's awesome. Yeah,
maybe only just a little bit of a poser. So, but for tonight, this afternoon, we are drinking my very favorite Japanese whiskey, which is Nika.
Oh yeah,
from the barrel. Which
is look at this. Look how small it is. This cost me like $100, and it's like so small, but it's so good. Like I had a little sip. Oh man, I forgot how good this is.
It's a single malt whiskey, and I'll tell just a little story to get us going. I first had this with a good friend of mine, somebody that Dr. Matthew Monger, and I were hanging out. He is a dangerous man.
I don't know why I said that.
We were hanging out one evening in Oslo, and we happened upon a whiskey bar and asked the lovely server what was good and what she recommended, and she recommended this, and we each had a sip, and we were like, God damn, that's good stuff. So cheers, my friend.
Cheers. It's it's so fruity, and
I often describe it to people as like, I imagine that's what it tastes like to chew on like an old oak barrel.
Yeah. It's got some like
smoky
sweetness to it and stuff. And last time you were on, we spoke about metal bands for 40 minutes, and everyone got mad. So now I thought we'd talk about whiskey bands. Whiskey.
Did people?
Some people loved it.
Did people really get mad?
Some people were like, the actual content starts at 45 minutes, and I'm like, oh, okay, my bad. But honestly, I need to, before we jump into it, I need to digress with whiskey, Scotch whiskey. It's all like, it's so interesting. All the color comes from the wood and where it is. All the taste, all the texture, the same chemicals that are in there are like some of the same chemicals you'll taste, and that's why you get like, oh, I can taste grape or I can taste coffee. It's like the same chemicals are in the wood for so long. It's an incredible process. Yeah, it's I
was going to say, it is not to be trifled with.
Yeah, 51%.
51.4. So, which is why the bottle is so small.
Yeah, and the Scottish word for whiskey is the Gaelic word is uskabella, which means water of life. Uskabella, water of life. And I know this is Japanese, but I think that's perfect for it.
As much as I like Scottish whiskey, I gotta say, I think the Japanese have knocked it out of the park. I mean,
Mm.
Nikka's my favorite, but there's a bunch of very, very good Japanese
Yeah,
whiskeys.
it's it truly is a marvelous creation. How do you know it had a designer? 'Cause it tastes so good. This conversation, we went through painstakingly.
Yeah.
God, it was painful, but it all started when. So I've been doing some video editing for Derek from MythVision, and just helping him out because he's just under the pump at the moment. And I edited this clip, and I immediately sent you a voicemail saying like, a voice message saying you were so spot on. So I just thought we could quickly show that clip so people could get the context of where the venom started coming out of my fangs, and then Kip's fangs joined, and we just watch. It's great.
Let's do it.
Pay attention to apologetics and to apologists. And I think it was in that moment that I realized, oh my God, this is a serious problem. Apologetics, in my mind, is one of the worst things about Christianity, because the entire enterprise, I won't even call it a discipline because it is not a scholarly discipline. The entire enterprise is founded on essentially placating the hurt feelings of insecure Christians. It is entirely in-house. It doesn't, the goal of apologetics, I am convinced, is modern apologetics is not about saving souls. It's about making Christians feel better about being Christians. And of course, the only way, as a biblical scholar, with so much of the problems within Christianity, especially the more fundamentalist or evangelical brands of Christianity, are centered on the Bible. The Bible is a problematic book because of the history, because of the very natural origins of the text and all the problems within the text. It's incredibly difficult for them to deal with, which is why apologetics is there. So it's all about helping Christians to get over their anxiety about the Bible.
And I think I'll just stop there, but I think you just hit the nail on the head so well, because that's exactly what it is. And I was wondering if you could kind of go into a little bit before we dive into the case for Christ. You could go in a little bit into why, like what happened. Like you said, you're part of in this video, and people should go watch the video on Derek's channel, MythVision. But why were you? Why did you have that perspective? Because there was a professor at the university that you were teaching at, right? That was essentially undoing what you were like. Well, not undoing, but and tell that story.
Like I think it's important for people to recognize too that this is stuff that I was already feeling very strongly about as a Christian. I worked at a Christian university, and in the last couple of years of my PhD program, I was I was like helping out with an instructor who held an endowed chair in theology at our college at the university, and he was an apologist, and he used his position and his courses basically just to disseminate apologetics. And it was a very uncomfortable position for me to be in, because I worked for this guy, but I was also part of the biblical studies department, and we had major problems with him because everything that we were attempting to do in terms of providing a critical historical framework to the biblical texts, he was working to basically dismantle. through these trite ad hoc explanations and harmonizations for the biblical text, which at the bottom of it just simply don't work. So I mean, I think that's where a lot of the frustration that I have for apologetics began there, with this recognition that that this is kind of where I started to feel like this is not about defending the faith. At least it's not about defending the faith to outsiders who ask questions about it. No, it's all about defending the faith to those on the inside who are questioning it.
So do you think would you say it's inherently, like, I have this perspective that it seems to be like it's inherently I don't know if it's inherently dishonest, but it's like it's not interested in truth. Like, inherently. I'm not talking about like bad faith actors like Ken Ham and Ken Hovind and stuff like that. I'm talking about like apologetics at its core is not about like uncovering the truth and finding what really works. It's about defending something.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So it's important to recognize this too. It's not an academic discipline. So the only place you will go to find departments of apologetics, or where you can get a degree in apologetics, are at Christian colleges and seminaries. I taught at a Christian university, and we didn't even have a department of apologetics. I mean, there were a handful of apologists who worked and taught at the school, but you could never get anything like that to fly. And I think that says a lot about what apologetics is. And I think one of the things that frustrates me so much about it is the way in which the industry attempts to package itself as an academic discipline, and attempts to make the claim that they're providing serious academic explanations to real philosophical, historical, scientific problems from the perspective of Christianity. But the only way that they can get there is by basically manipulating the truth.
Yeah.
So
and that, this was a little bit of a I will say shock, because I thought that for the most part apologists were just like on the other side of the conversation, like they were just, but for me, like realizing that they were like no, like this is a game, like it was quite wild. I have an example of in the case for Christ of where this is blatant, in my opinion. This is absolutely blatant. But I was wondering if we should kick it off with that, or if we should kick it off with, you have a bit of a preamble that you kind of want to discuss.
So I think I think it's important to get into like what we're doing and why we're doing it here. So I think you brought it up maybe just offhand, because I had mentioned something in that interview that I did with Derek about this book. And if I remember correctly, the thing that you keyed in on about the book, that what I had mentioned about it was that so for anybody who doesn't know, I'm surprised if you don't, but if people are unaware, the book The Case for Christ was written by an apologist by the name of Lee Strobel. It was published back in 1998, and the premise of the book is that he is a former investigative journalist who used to work for the Chicago Tribune, who ended up embarking on in his mind and in his words, a serious intellectual inquiry into the quote unquote case for Christ. the validity of the claims of Christianity. In particular, was Jesus who he said he was? How can we know it? Did he die and rise from death? So that this is sort of the premise of the entire book. What a lot of people miss, and which I have always found a little bit duplicitous, is that Lee Strobel became a Christian in 1981. The book was published in 1998, a full 17 years, I think 17 or 18 years after his conversion. And he does say this right in the introduction of the book. He makes a point of saying that this is a recreation of his initial investigation. But it's not the actual investigation itself. This is something that he's doing now post hoc, right? This is after the fact. In fact,
very much like the gospel writers.
This is a very, very good point that you keyed in on, and we'll talk about it in a minute here. But so it's 17 years after his conversion. He's already been pastoring a church for over 10 years at this point. So he's a pastor at Bill Hybels' massive church in Chicago, Willow Creek. But maybe it helps. Just looking at my notes here, this is how he begins the book. I'm just going to read a little bit from his opening chapter.
Yeah.
And he presents himself like this. For much of my life, I was a skeptic. In fact, I considered myself an atheist. To me, there was far too much evidence that God was merely a product of wishful thinking, of ancient mythology, of primitive superstition. How could there be a loving God if he consigned people to hell for just not believing in him? How could miracles contravene the basic laws of nature? Didn't evolution satisfactorily explain how life originated? Doesn't scientific reasoning dispel belief in the supernatural? As for Jesus, didn't you know that he never claimed to be God? He was a revolutionary, a sage, an iconoclastic Jew, but God? No, that thought never occurred to him. I could point you to plenty of university professors who said so. And certainly they could be trusted, couldn't they? Let's face it. Even a cursory examination of the evidence demonstrates convincingly that Jesus had only been a human being, just like you and me, although with unusual gifts of kindness and wisdom. But that's all I had ever really given. That's all I had ever really given the evidence. A cursory look. I had read just enough philosophy and history to find support for my skepticism. A fact here, a scientific theory there, a pithy quote, a clever argument. Sure, I could see some gaps and inconsistencies, but I had a strong motivation to ignore them. A self-serving and immoral lifestyle that I would be compelled to abandon if I were ever to change my views and become a follower of Jesus. So this is how he presents himself, right? It's key here. I think he begins his story by noting that the first kind of watershed moment for him in this journey was when his wife Leslie became a Christian, and this prompted, according to him, his investigation into what he calls the facts surrounding the case for Christianity. So here I'm reading again. He says, Leslie stunned me in the autumn of 1979 by announcing that she had become a Christian. I rolled my eyes and braced for the worst, feeling like a victim of a bait and switch scam. I married one Leslie, the fun Leslie, the carefree Leslie, the risk-taking Leslie, and now I feared she was going to turn into some sort of sexually repressed prude who would trade our upward mobile lifestyle for all-night prayer vigils and volunteer work in grimy soup kitchens. The guy can write. Let's give him that.
Give credit where credit is due. He is an amazing writer. Like I was saying, I said this yesterday. He's just fantastic. Like he really knows how to. Like he's obviously had a career in journalism. Like it's It's really well written. Really convincing too. If you look at it at face value, but if you look under the surface a little bit, that's where some of the problems start to poke out. But this is this is a great point, because this is exactly the kind of book that, you know what? This is a bit of an anecdote, but when I was a Christian, I remember someone lent me the book Refuting Evolution. Okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know what the theory of evolution really was, because I didn't pay attention really in school. So I didn't really know even the basics of it, right? I knew generally the basics, but I didn't know like the evidence for it. And I read this book, and then every time someone would bring it up, evolution, to me as a Christian, I'd say, I've read a whole book called Refuting Evolution. I couldn't remember one thing from that book. And that book was telling me it's amazing that it just gave me the ability to hand wave away all the evidence for evolution, because on the surface it gave me this this thing that was like, oh, it's been solved. This smart person says so. And that's what the case for Christ is done for a lot of people, I think, is it's like, well, they're interviewing Bible scholars and he does this sneaky thing at the end. He always, like, of every chapter, he's like, I wasn't really fully fulfilled. So I just had to ask him, like, how has your scholarship affected your faith in Christ? Like, worried that it's going to, like, and it's like,
it is the one common question that he asks everyone in the book, right?
And they're always like, oh, it's built by faith.
And it's kind of like the clincher. So no, you're on point here. So I'm just gonna finish up this bit here that I've got from his introduction. He says, instead, I was pleasantly surprised, even fascinated by the fundamental changes in her character, her integrity. Stroll was talking about his wife, Leslie, and her personal confidence. Eventually, I wanted to get to the bottom of what was prompting these subtle but significant shifts in my wife's attitude. So I launched an all-out investigation into the facts surrounding the case for Christianity, setting aside my self-interest and prejudices as best I could. I read books, interviewed experts, asked questions, analyzed history, explored archaeology, studied ancient literature, and for the first time in my life, picked apart the Bible verse by verse. So that's his presentation of what happened. Now, importantly, he also notes that this book is not that. It's not his initial investigation. This book, written 17 years later, is like a reenactment of that. And I think there's some important dates here that we need to put out there right at the outset. So Lee says that his wife, Leslie, converted to Christianity in autumn 1979. In another blog post on his own blog, he says that his investigation into Christianity took place over the course of 21 months, from the 20th of January 1980 until the 8th of November 1981. So if you're doing the math here, it's like a 4, maybe 5 month span between the time when his wife converts to the point when he decides, I need to look into this. And I suspect in other parts that I've read and things that I've seen in talks of his that he's given, it sounds like he started going to church quite a little bit, quite some time before he actually started his investigation. So this is already stuff that's percolating. And then on the 8th of November 1981, Lee Strobel converts to Christianity. Okay, so it was published in 98. He says that the book is, as I mentioned, a reenactment of sorts of his initial quest. He says that is what this book is about. In effect, I'm going to retrace and expand upon the spiritual journey I took for nearly 2 years. So, very importantly, the people whom he interviews in this book, the experts that he interviews in this book, are not the people he consulted in his initial quest. Like in his dogged investigation of the claims of Christianity. We don't know anything about that. So this is a reconstruction of that.
Yeah. And imagine it would be a mess. Imagine if you talk to critical scholars or scholars who who were non-believers but world renowned, like Bart Ehrman's probably the most popular scholar in the world, like with so many, well, like for the popular level. You know, it's like, imagine if you spoke to them, like what kind of book would it be?
You know, it's interesting because one of the guys in his book, Gregory Boyd, was actually a student of Metzger and a contemporary of Bart Ehrman at Princeton Theological Seminary when they were there. They were there together. So, it's true. What kind of an investigation did he actually embark on in the first place? I've mentioned this to you, and if Lee Strobel ever sees this, I would put the challenge to him. What I want to see, what I think the world wants to see, is that book. I think everybody wants to see the original manuscripts. Let's see.
We don't want to see a copy of a copy
investigation.
Of a copy. Yeah, exactly.
But isn't that just the New Testament for you?
Yeah,
right.
It's.
I mean,
it is interesting. It is interesting. So, what we're going to do is we'll go through some of the chapters and just. You.
One more thing. So there's something else that I have to say before we get into that. So, Strobel has been criticized and accused of being duplicitous in his presentation of this material in the past. Most notably, I'll share my screen here, and I encourage everyone to go and check this out. This is the New Testament Review podcast by Ian Mills and Laura Robinson. They started this when they were PhD students at Duke. They've both since graduated. It is an excellent podcast. But in one of their episodes, they did like a review of Lee Strobel's book. And this was one of their primary criticism. What I just pointed out, that this is not actually the investigation he undertook. This was written years and years later. So Strobel actually fired back at this. So he said, and I think it's important to point out, I agree with Mills and with Robinson in their charges that Strobel's entire charade of an investigation is duplicitous. I think it is, but I think it's more subtle and nuanced than they indicated in their podcast. I think that most of his own counter critique is fair because they were not careful enough to nuance Strobel's entire project, because he does clearly spell out in the introduction and in the conclusion of his book. Let's be fair here. He clearly spells out this is not the investigation itself. This is a recreation of that. And they didn't pick up on that, or they missed it. It happens. There are PhD students undoubtedly absolutely buried by comps and everything else they had going on. I don't doubt they read the book very quickly. So there's that. I also believe that they are not totally on point with the real problems in the book. Strobel actually wrote up a long response to them on his website. I think I sent you the link. I could include the link to that in the chat, or you could. And in his response, Strobel ends with this. I'm going to read this bit at the end. At the end of his response to them, he's very upset at how much repulsion they exhibit for apologists and apologetics. And it both Ian Mills and Laura Robinson's are Christians. And the reason they respond the way they do are the same reasons that I had when I was, working for an apologist at Trinity Western University when I was still a Christian. Because there seems to be an underlying there are some points within the whole discipline which are just dishonest. So he's very upset at them for denigrating apologetics, and this is how he responds to them. He says, I should point out that in the midst of their scoffing, these two critics, Mills and Robinson, completely overlook the fact that this kind of evidence, what he presents in the book, was precisely what the Holy Spirit used to reach me when I was still a God-denying, profane, drunken, and often angry skeptic. And he used it to bring me to the foot of the cross, to genuine repentance, and to a life of leading thousands of others to find and follow Jesus. The last chapter in the updated version of the book, I haven't read that one, but he says in the last chapter of the updated version of the book chronicles several of these inspiring stories. So I have to ask, Strobel says, what was it again that these two podcasters are so dead set against? My conclusion: intellectuals bicker all the time, and that's fine. And yes, the scholars in my book are conservative, because I found the squishy claims of most liberals to be ill-supported. Of course, there are going to be disagreements, and I understand that podcasters want to attract an audience. Nevertheless, critics should be fair, and relevant facts should never be deceptively omitted, especially by those who say they are brothers and sisters in Christ. So, here is where I believe apologetics generally and Strobel in particular are being misleading by downplaying the reality of their own faith convictions. Because I think for Strobel, and I think for Josh McDowell, and I think for J. Warner Wallace, and I think for Mike Winger, and all these guys, it comes down to how Jesus makes me feel and the kind of change he has
100%.
made in my life. It's not about the intellectual merits. It's not.
Not at
So
all.
my criticism is that by downplaying the reality of their own faith convictions, which have much less to do with the actual historical reality of Christianity and much more to do with their own circumstances, this is misleading. Also, Strobel's outright dismissal of the squishy claims of most liberals. And this word liberal, this is an invented word by evangelicals. This isn't something that scholars talk about. There are no liberal scholars. There's just scholars. It's woefully uninformed and exceedingly problematic. It's obvious from the contents of his book that he does not even have a rudimentary grasp of critical scholarship, and by hand-waving at it like all apologists do, he is in effect being either completely dishonest or just ignorant by instilling within his readers a false sense of confidence in bad ideas about history. So Strobel says that, quote, relevant facts should never be deceptively omitted. Well, here we are, to put his own arrogant triumphalism to the test. Okay? So our goal in this review is to accurately and clearly point out those places where Strobel is just flatly wrong, and how these errors completely shipwreck the project of Christian apologetics. Okay, that was my sermon.
Well, that is fantastic. Amen. Let's do an altar call. But honestly, there's a few things I want to mention. One, how funny is the word scoffers? The word scoffers, like, who uses, like, it's this clearly from like, I love a good scoff.
Christians use that word.
Like, what is that word? It's 2023.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just from the Bible.
Scoffers, right? Liberals. It's this is Christianity 101, right? This is what it is. So
something you pointed out, and this is so clear, is it, and I want to make this distinction, and I don't actually have any problem with this. There's belief in God. I don't believe in God. I'm no longer convinced of the evidence, but there's belief in God. There's faith. That is separate to scholarship. What it feels like right now is I'm watching like a high school drama, and there's like, there's like the two, like I'm watching like the scholars and the apologists are at each other's like throats, and the rest of the world is kind of watching it. Well, the rest of Deep Drinks is watching on, going like, okay, who's right here? What's going on? Who cheated on who? You know, it's like a reality TV show, right?
Yeah, man.
And so,
Yep.
but so you have a very different perspective, obviously, because you're kind of you're like doing the scholarship. But something I want to point out is the problem I have is not this belief, like someone's belief here. I'm using different areas of belief. I don't have a problem with the belief. I have a problem with joining it with the scholarship and pretending like it's combined. Just to give an anecdote, I was walking home one day, and I had a shopping bag with me, and this lady was frantic. She came up to me and she was really frantic, and I thought she needed help with something. And she came up and she said, and I took out my earphones, and she said, I need to tell you about something. I said, yeah, what? And she goes, oh, Jesus, blah, 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 and started talking to me about Jesus. And I said, oh my. And I said, look, I said, honestly, I don't feel comfortable in this conversation. I would like to politely keep going. And she refused to acknowledge that and just continued on with her testimony.
Geez.
She told me that God had saved her from anxiety and depression, and that she had a severe eating disorder that was healed when she came to Jesus, and none of the other treatments worked. She went to hospitals, she did all these things, and none of it worked. So I listened, and I listened to her tell her testimony for a long time. And then I said, you know, can I ask you a question about this? And she said, yeah, sure. And I said, now, I'm not saying this is the case, but let's say that I said, but that's all convincing evidence for you to believe in your God, right? And she said, yes, of course. Like that's why I believe. It's because I had these experiences. I said, sure. I said, if a third person was to come up to this conversation and they were to say, hey, they had a similar story. Hey, God saved me from an eating disorder, blah, blah, blah. But they were to attribute it to a different God, Buddha, Allah, Krishna, one of the 3,000 different gods that exist, or maybe ancestor worship or something else. Would that be evidence of their belief system? And she got real angry. She got like she started saying things like, I won't even answer such a stupid question. That wouldn't happen. Buddha does nothing for nobody. Allah does nothing for nobody. And I'm saying, well, why? Why is it evidence for your God, but not evidence for someone else's belief? It might not even be God. It might be, counting to certain numbers, or some sort of superstition, or aliens, or my dad's looking out for me from heaven. Like why is it evidence for you, but not evidence for them? And that's the point. The point is they have this experience, and a lot of Christians will have this experience. I had an experience, and you'll attribute it to something. But what I find apologists doing is they'll have an experience, or they'll believe in God for whatever reason. They'll move into apologetics, and then they'll combine them as if that's the reason why they believe in the first place. Ask any apologist, why do they start believing? It's not because, well, I was a skeptic, and then I read the Kalam cosmological argument, and no, it was sold. Like, it's not. It never happens. It's either the parent, they were a drug addict, they came to Jesus, or they were, it's experience first, and that's the point.
The experience becomes the lens through which they read everything else, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the problem that that I had as a Christian. I mean, you've got Ian Mills and Laura Robinson, who are both Christians, saying the same thing. The problem with apologetics is that the veneer, the experience, becomes the lens through which the scholarship is done. And you can't do that, because the minute you start doing that, it's no longer scholarship.
Exactly. But are those Christians liberal Christians?
Sorry, what?
Are the Christians liberal Christians? The ones on the podcast. Like, sorry, I shouldn't have interjected with a joke, because that was a really good point there. But so
good. I promised this was going to be funny. So.
This was going to be funny. Yeah, takes a while to warm up. But the whiskey's the second fact. So there's something.
Hold on. Can I just say how much admiration I have for you, to have abandoned, the corporate world to pursue your dreams of being a day drinker. And spending Spending your days hammered on YouTube.
Well,
Good for you, David.
My new boss is actually in the chat. I'll be video editing full time, but the more it affords me more opportunities to work on deep drinks, and I can drink at early times of the day. I am like legitimately worried though. I'm like, is there like a biological click that's going to happen, and one day I'm just going to become an alcoholic? Like I'm genuinely worried about that. Like I'm like, is it like diabetes? We have too much sugar, and then you're like, click, like. So
is this is there some special in like is this can you get some special hazard insurance for this? Is
working at heights kind of like license?
Yeah, exactly.
Drinking and
well, my job requires me to be drunk most of the time.
And what's funny is when someone's like, I want to do Powerade or like some sort of energy drink or coffee or something, I'm like, oh yes, I don't have to be hung, I don't have to be drunk at 10 in the morning. Like, thank God. Anyway,
next time, I promise. I was actually thinking about this. I was like, is there an unalcoholic drink that I could enjoy with David for the next time I do his podcast?
No, that's I think Kip episodes. Straight whiskey is great for Kip episodes. Same with Inspiring Philosophy. Like he drinks like heavy. But Neil, the 604 Atheist, we're coming up with a time, but he'll be drinking water. So we'll be drinking water together. So yeah, that's right. What it is. And unfortunately, it's not deep smoke on. I
have my glass of ice water.
Because I know that a few guests have asked if we could smoke weed, and I can't. It's not legal in Australia. And also,
is that right?
When it is legal,
oh wow!
Yeah, when it's legal, it will be legal in the next couple of years. But when it's legal, we can watch me have a panic attack on time. So anyway, something I did want to bring up is something that just leapt out of me before we'll go through the chapters one on one. But I wanted to just give everyone a taste of what I'm talking about when I say dishonest kind of reporting, dishonest apologetics. So we're 4 chapters into the book. We will go back and we'll go through one at a time, but we're in chapter 4, okay? And I looked it up. I read it. The word gospel is mentioned 111 times up to this point in the book. Okay. The Control F on the PDF. And so you get the idea that Lee Strobel is talking about the Gospels, and he's talking to a scholar, and he does this thing in the book that I find like hilarious. I wanted to do a reenactment with you, and maybe we came when we were drunk. It's like I wasn't too convinced of this, and then it's like, well, David, but like he's just very like he comes across as like being skeptical, and the person presents that and he's like, well, that's not good enough, and then the person presents even more evidence, and it's like, whoa, like that's what the whole gimmick of the book is, right? But what he says here, and I'll read it out, he says, I'll be honest with you, I said to Metzger, when I first found out that there are no surviving originals, now remember, he's been talking about the Gospels, when I found out that there was no surviving originals of the New Testament, I was skeptical. So you see how the word New Testament's there instead of Gospels. I thought, very skeptical. If all we have are copies of copies of copies, how can we have any confidence that the New Testament we have today bears any resemblance whatsoever to what was originally written? How do you respond to that? And then the person replied, Bruce Metzger, replied, we have copies commencing within a couple of generations from the writings of the original. Whereas in the case for other ancient texts, maybe 5, 8, or 10 centuries elapsed between the original and the early surviving copy. Now that's interesting, because I was like, a couple of generations? What, like what is that? Like, that's not, like, he makes it out like it's so close. Last night, I messaged the slavery panel, and I haven't been able to, like, we got a group message where we send each other memes and nonsense. And sometimes some scholarship. But I was like, hang on, I was looking for the first complete copies we had of the Gospels, and we're getting into like the 8th century, because like they've been damaged and stuff, and like this, but like we're getting like way into the tracks. And if you've been a community member on Deep Drinks, you've seen that I've been putting up some community like quizzes. Which I've just had.
Quizzes.
Posts. Yeah, okay. Yeah. You can do quizzes when you get to a certain amount. And this is one of the. So remember, 1 or 2 generations is what he says. It's so close. It's like in a lifetime. So I wrote this. The Gospel of Mark was written anonymously. It was the earliest of the Gospels of Jesus. According to consensus scholarship, when was Mark most likely written? So it was written 40 years after Jesus died. That's the general scholarship. That's right, Kip?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
pretty.
If I say anything wrong,
point,
just yeah, I don't want you to be like, "Ugh," like message me in the private, like you're wrong here. No,
you idiot.
I looked it up. The gospel, and so then the next post, right? So this is we've already got 40 years after the fact. So you got someone, and remember, it's anonymously written. It's not Mark the disciple. It's not someone. It's an anonymous source writing in a different language, in a different location, about things that they didn't see, that we don't know that they saw 40 years after the fact. Okay. Well, you think, okay, well, what is the earliest surviving copy we have of the first gospel, which is Mark, of this book? The Gospel of Mark was written anonymously 40 years after Jesus had died, but what was the earliest surviving complete copy of the gospel? So not that we have complete today, but like the one that like, this is the whole gospel in one chunk. 340 years after Jesus had died. So 370 CE. That is that it? Is that part of the Gospel of Mark?
So no, what I have on the screen is Luke, but
Okay.
but this is from Codex Vaticanus, which dates to about 350, 370, and Mark, the entirety of Mark is in there. So, but yes, you're absolutely on point here.
So, and just to give you, the first complete copy of Mark shows about 300 years after the original was written. The earliest fragment we have, so tiny little fragment, it's 4 verses on either side, 2 verses on one side, 2 verses on the other side, is called Papyrus 137, and is dated to 200 CE, 170 years after. And this isn't like, oh, we had a copy that burnt up in a fire and like scientists knew about it. Like, this is what we've got for the Gospel of Mark, which is our earliest gospel, which doesn't mention the virgin birth, which doesn't mention the disciples' encounter with the resurrected Jesus, which has another ending tacked on, which it's like, this is wild to me. Like that, like this was just missed. Yeah. So,
and we will get to that, right? So, like when we get to the Metzger chapter, we'll talk about manuscripts, and this is something that I know a little bit about.
And we will, but I just want to recircle, because think about that though. Like, think about everything I just 200 CE, our first little fragment of the Gospel of Mark, and then you go, okay, that's what scholarship says, and then you go, well, what Metzger is saying is, and it's like, remember, 111 times the Gospel's mentioned, and then we're just talking about the New Testament. We have copies commencing within a couple of generations from the writings of the originals. Now, he's talking about the epistles. He's talking about Paul's letters, which don't mention the life and times and death and resurrection of Jesus. He's talking about like church writings. He's not talking, and that's still a couple of generations, but you know what I mean? So it's being sneaky. It's being deliberately deceptive. He can't not be seen as deceptive in this case, in my opinion. Like, this is the category I was talking about earlier, where it's like, he's just being dishonest. He's just being dishonest here. Like, there's no way that he didn't know this, and there's no way that he didn't know that his readers would read it a certain way and go, oh yeah, the Gospels, we have accounts, copies. Like,
so
it's not the case.
When people find out about the manuscript evidence that survives for the Gospels, and like, to give you an idea, I will show you every single manuscript copy of the Gospels that date to before the year 200. And the reason I can do that is because there's 8 of them. So, but like, we'll get to that. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's a number of preconceptions that Strobel depends on in forwarding his case for Christ. And from the start of it, like, he begins his book. For those who don't know, the book is divided into, I think it's 14 chapters, and it consists of 13 interviews, or is it 15 chapters and 13 interviews with individual scholars. The first is with Craig Blomberg, and he is careful at the outset to set the parameters of his entire investigation on a couple of very key important points. In the first place, he wants to establish that the Gospels, the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, provide reliable eyewitness testimony that we can use to reconstruct history. And he also wants to establish that the authorship of the 4 Gospels traces back to reliable eyewitnesses. And this is deliberate because you will discover as you read through the entire rest of the book, once he thinks he has that, then he assumes it for everything else that follows. And this is hugely problematic. It's a massive, massive mistake. And I will I'll point that out when we get into it. So
should we?
I think
should we
so. Well, yeah, we'll dive in. There's one more thing I wanted to say, and I apologize to everybody for this very long preamble introduction, but I think it's good. It's been kind of necessary to sort of set the stage here. And I'm almost half finished my glass of whiskey. So it's important to point out that, God damn it.
Damn whiskey!
Damn whiskey! Damn you, Nika! Okay, it'll come back to me in a moment. Oh, it was almost there. This is so bad. Shoot. That's it. Yes, I got it. Okay. This is the first time I've read the book.
Yeah, same.
I think that's important to point out. And I even in the interview, so I'll say this, in the interview that I gave on Derek's channel on Myth Vision, I mentioned the book in the context in terms of the story of how Lee Strobel ended up becoming a Christian, writing the book. I talk about that in the interview I did with Derek Lambert. I had not ever read the book at that point, but what's really interesting is that I knew a ton about the book even before I ever read it, in large part because of how much the book has been integrated into Lee Strobel's own testimony and his own public persona, right? I felt like I knew every bit of the book, and there was nothing in the book that really surprised me, except maybe some of the unbelievably stupid things he says. But it's become so much part of his own public persona and his own testimony that I almost didn't even feel like I needed to read it in the outset to be able to criticize it, and that's not a good thing. So, and I'll just say one more thing. What kind of to give you an idea when I have relatively recently deconstructed, within the last 5 years or so. And when this first started happening, and I had a very emotional conversation with my mother about this. This is something that she mentioned to me. She said to me, she's like, I don't know. She's like, have you ever talked to somebody who knows, stuff that could help you out? To which my first response was, Ma, I'm a biblical scholar. And she's like, well, what about this? She's like, what about this book, Case for Christ by Lee Strobel? And I don't think she's ever read it, but she knew she knew that there's this book out there, right? And
Mm.
having not read it, but knowing a lot about it, my initial response was like one of unbelievable disgust. Like I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, without ever even having read this book, I know this guy hasn't the first goddamn clue about what he's talking about. So, yeah, I thought that was important to sort of point out before we get into this. So maybe we should do that, eh?
Yeah. So the first. So do you want to jump into the first chapter, the eyewitness evidence,
Yeah.
or the first point?
Let's do that.
So yeah, I've got only one thing to talk about with this, but I'll let you kind of you kind of jump into it. So I guess what we'll do, because a lot of people may not have read the book, they might not even care about the book. It's an old book at this stage. A lot of people have, I guess, built their foundations off this, but we can use this as like a broader conversation on the points that are brought up. So the first point that I guess we could discuss is eyewitness testimony. Were the Gospels written from eyewitnesses? Was the death, resurrection, and crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus eyewitnesses from eyewitness accounts? When he floated up into the heavens and is presumably still out in space heading towards heaven, because unless he sped up faster than the speed of light, it would take him 13.8 billion years to get past where we've seen. So he's presumably still out there. He's not returning because he hasn't made it there yet to return back. So yeah, so was that all eyewitness testimony?
Yeah. So the way Strobel structures every chapter too, I think is worth pointing out, is he begins every single chapter by recalling something pretty interesting about a case that he had reported on. Apparently he was maybe a crime reporter, or he was an investigative reporter, right, for the Chicago Tribune. So like he opens chapter 1 with this story about this murder trial, right, at the beginning, as a way to sort of set the stage for, you know, what an eyewitness is and the value of eyewitness testimony. And so in the in the first interview, in the first place, he interviews Craig Blomberg, who is a New Testament scholar and an apologist. He teaches at Denver Seminary. He got his PhD from Aberdeen University in Scotland. I thought it was quite. It was interesting to me. It was somewhat amusing. Strobel points out that he graduated magna cum laude from his MA program at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, which is the only thing you mention. Like you know, if it's not your terminal degree, graduating magna cum laude from your previous degree doesn't actually mean anything. So I thought it was kind of funny that he mentioned that.
What is that? What does that mean? What is
so?
That?
There are it's not used as much anymore, but it used to be. These are levels of honors. So summa cum laude, and then magna cum laude. The summa cum laude is and I don't remember what the Latin means, but these are ways of distinguishing graduates with honor, and summa cum laude is like a graduate with honor, and magna cum laude is a graduate with, you know, distinction. So
I got a letter saying I was in the top like 5% or like even 1 or 2% of my marketing degree. Does that mean I passed with some?
Yeah, you'd probably be like a summa cum laude
God tier.
There you go, man.
Anxiety of failing got me through that bad boy. And my marriage took years off my marriage life.
So here's the direct quote. He says that he was a magna cum laude graduate from a prestigious seminary, which is Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And the note I had here in the chapter was that I find it amusing. Strobel draws attention to Blomberg's distinction as a student at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, which is prestigious in the minds of only evangelicals. It's an evangelical seminary, you know, in the world of academics. It's like
we really should have done
it's nothing special.
we really should have done a tier
Nothing at
list for
all.
these apologetic universities, like these.
But
seminars
one of
and
the
stuff.
things you'll discover throughout this whole book is an astonishing number of either graduates or faculty members at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I guess it makes sense. I mean, Strobel's from Chicago and Ted's is located in a suburb of Chicago. So, you know, it was close by. And as far as evangelical schools go, it's probably somewhere close to the top. So, you know, it makes sense for him to have gone there. But for somebody with, you know, a critical eye and who knows the field, Ted's is a nothing podunk backwater Bible college. I don't know. It's graduating from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is not something you put at the top of your CV. It's just not. So yeah.
So
all right.
So eyewitness testimony.
Eyewitness testimony. All right. First of all, maybe before I get into
yeah. Go.
What anything stood out to you in this chapter? And do you have any questions that
first of all
dive into?
This whole book, like I felt like my eyes were gonna get stuck, like because my eyes were rolling so because I was listening to it. My eyes were rolling.
Oh yeah, right.
But so not I don't have so many notes on the chapter itself for the eyewitness testimony. However, I do want to get your thoughts on like why do some people insist that there was eyewitness testimony when we know the Gospels were anonymous?
Okay. So at one point in this chapter, so Strobel asked the question, quote, how uniform was the belief? So the one of the key points of this chapter is to establish in order to establish that the eyewitness testimony that there's eyewitness testimony in here and that it's reliable, Strobel needs to first establish the authorship. And Blomberg affirms the traditional authorship of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of which are anonymous. And then he asks this question: how uniform was the belief that these four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were the authors? And Blomberg responds by saying there are no known competitors for the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Apparently, it was not in dispute. This is what he says about the authorship, and something that he points to establish this fact is a statement made by the church father Papias, who apparently wrote sometime around 130. So this is 100 years after the death of Jesus. So Papias is very important for evangelical scholars because he mentions specific gospels composed. He says by Matthew, and he says Mark translated the memoirs of Peter. It's important to note this is not direct evidence. We only know of Papias's work through Eusebius, who was writing about Papias sometime between 312 and 324. So now you're like a couple hundred additional years removed from even the life of Papias. Papias is purported to have actually known John, who was John the disciple of Jesus. So, but this is what Papias actually says about the or this is what Eusebius says about what Papias says about gospel authorship.
If there's like a Venn diagram, it's like anonymous gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written at least 40 to 70, 40 to 90, 40 to 70 years after the events occurred. And then from that, you've got like a string that goes to like this guy called Papias. When was he around? When was he writing? In like
130-ish?
130. So that would be, so we're talking 100 years after the
100
fact.
years after the death of Jesus. If Mark is our earliest gospel and was written in and around 60, I think is the conventional dating. So like
60,
another
70,
70 years after that, Papias writes this. He says, Mark, having become an interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately, though not in order, whatsoever he remembered of the things said or done by Christ. For he neither heard the Lord nor followed him, but afterwards, as I said, he followed Peter, who adapted his teaching in the needs of his hearers, but with no intention of giving a connected account of the Lord's discourses, so that Mark committed no error, while he thus wrote some things as he remembered him, for he was careful of one thing, not to omit any of the things which he heard, and not to state any of them falsely. And then a little bit later, talking about Matthew, he says concerning Matthew, this is Eusebius now says, concerning Matthew, he, Papias, writes as follows: so then Matthew wrote the oracles in the Hebrew language, and everyone interpreted them as he was able. So there's a couple of problems at the outset here, and they stem very very clearly on this matter of language. This matter of language is a major issue for Christian apologists, because when you read the Gospels, which are all in Greek, and when experts in languages deeply probe the texts of the Gospels, which are all written in Greek, they come to the same conclusion. These texts were all written in Greek. None of them were translated from Aramaic or from Hebrew. I mean, there are indicators within a translated text which can, tell you that this was translated from another language. I think it's much more difficult to detect that now, but in ancient times it was quite a bit easier. And everyone is unanimous on this point. The Gospels were composed in Greek. Now, why is this a problem? So this is a problem because the eyewitnesses to Jesus's life and resurrection were Aramaic-speaking Jews. They were Aramaic-speaking Jews from Galilee, which was in the northern hinterland of the region. And what this basically means is that there is almost no chance that any of them knew a lick of Greek. And even worse, most of them were probably illiterate. If they could write anything at all, it would have been in Aramaic. And of course, we know that because the Gospels were not translated from Aramaic, then no, there's just no way that you can get these back to eyewitnesses.
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. So this is, if I was a, still a Christian, I would say it's a miracle that Noah's Ark could do what it did or whatever. It's a miracle. Like, God can do anything. Is it possible, and this is something I heard, is it possible that in their later years, traveling the world, preaching the gospel, that the Aramaic-speaking disciples ended up in Greece and decided, you know what, I'm going to learn Greek and write this down? What's the chance of someone in their middle age doing that?
So that's extremely low, just by virtue of the fact that, language or learning how to read and write was an incredibly specialized skill that belonged almost entirely exclusively to the wealthy. And even if they had learned to read and write Greek, you could still tell that they were translating this translating from an Aramaic, from a Semitic background and mindset. I mean, it would
Semitic
come
as
through in
in-
their writing.
Can you, what is Semitic? Sorry, can you,
Semitic languages are like Hebrew, Aramaic, I believe like Old Egyptian. So it's a language classification in which both Hebrew and Aramaic are Semitic languages. Greek is not a Semitic language. It's a
so
different
you're
type
saying
of
that
language.
if they did learn to write Greek, you still would have been able to pick up some of their.
You could tell.
Okay.
So
I can
now
get that.
one of the things I will point out, one of the things that scholars do when they look at the Gospels is there are now it doesn't come through in the construction of the literature, but there are a couple of very small points in actual quotations of Jesus, like where he's speaking, where there are remnants of Aramaic, and this
Mhm.
this is given scholars an indication that these are things that go back to, you know, a very, very ancient, this is like very ancient core material, maybe was something spoken by Jesus himself, just because it preserves what we call Aramaisms, but they're just within like the sayings, right? They don't expand into the actual construction of the Gospels themselves.
Mm.
So this is a serious problem. Now, something else I wanted to point out here is, I mean, this raises a question about attribution. Like, when do we know of? Blomberg says that there's no dispute of gospel authorship, that nobody else is ever suggested as an author. Like, for instance, you know, for the Gospel of Mark, nobody ever actually says no, this is the Gospel of Peter. For the Gospel of Luke, nobody ever says no, this is the Gospel of Thaddeus or whatever, right? So it's what he says is true, but it's important to kind of track how this works historically. So what do we know about gospel attribution, about the attribution of the traditional authors Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to the Gospels, and how early does this happen? So working from the beginning, like working from the oldest text that we have, I start with the Didache, which is a very, very old Christian text written in Greek, probably around the year 100, maybe later. But the Didache actually quotes text from the Gospels, specifically from Matthew chapter 6. And it cites it only as the Lord commanded. So it never names Matthew. It just cites it as something commanded by the Lord. And it's a saying of Jesus, right? So that's as early as 100. So the Epistle Barnabas was written about 130. It also quotes Matthew, but again, doesn't ever mention Matthew's name. It just says it is written. Justin Martyr might be our most... Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, the Epistle of Barnabas, is that one of the epistles that was argued to be in the canon but didn't end up in the canon?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So, and probably because it's a little late. Yeah. Although there are, scholars are now suggesting that there are, contemporary stuff within our New Testaments with the Epistle of Barnabas. So,
I have a question. You said you've recently deconstructed in the last 5 years. Have any of your opinions on any of these matters changed since your deconstruction, or this is just scholarship through and through?
This is scholarship.
Okay. And what was the sin that
Martyr,
you chose? What was the sin that got you to leave Christianity? Was it
it's
scoffing?
Porn, dude. It's porn. It's always porn. Come on.
It's always porn. That's why so many people are walking away. It's the pawns. It's the pawns that does it.
All right.
No, my favorite is scoffing. I love a scoff.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. So Justin Martyr is maybe our most important early church writer, just because of how early he is. He's writing at about 150, so mid 2nd century. This is, if we're using the Gospel of Mark as like a starting point, 90 years after Mark supposedly wrote his gospel. So Justin Martyr quotes from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and he quotes extensively from them. So he clearly had these gospels in his possession. So we can be pretty confident that at the very least, Matthew, Mark, and Luke were already written by 150. However, he calls them the memorabilia of the apostles, and of Mark, in one place he says he calls it the memorabilia of Peter. So now maybe that actually is a challenge to Blomberg's claim that there is nobody else was suggested as authors for these texts. I don't know. But importantly, I think it's important to point out that Justin Martyr, writing in 150, does not know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote the Gospels that are attributed to them.
John?
Okay. He doesn't quote from John.
Yeah.
Ever. Okay. So he apparently doesn't know about John, which is another problem. All right. Next, we have Tatian, who wrote the Diatessaron in around 180. Now, the Diatessaron is an amazing text. It is a conflation of the 4 Gospels. So what Tatian did, Tatian was a student of Justin Martyr, and he decided to sit down with and he had all 4 of the Gospels, so including John, and he decided to combine them all together, and basically in like a chronological order. So he pieced them all together as one large single gospel, just by combining all the elements of the 4. So, and in so doing, he omits doublets. So things repeated, he doesn't repeat. He just like kind of massages those. He harmonizes some discrepancies into a single narrative, but importantly, again, he doesn't seem to know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John wrote any of these texts. He makes no mention of them. Okay, so we're at 180 at this point. So now we're 120 years after Mark wrote his gospel, and still no mention of Mark. The Muratorian fragment is an important list of New Testament texts. It's dated to sometime between 180 and 200, and it, for the first time, knows of 4 Gospels and names Luke and John specifically. And it mentions that there's a 3rd and 4th, but doesn't actually name them. So scholars tend to point to this date, sometime between 180 and 200, as like the first place where we have actual mention of the gospel authors. So again, yeah.
Wow. So
and before that, I think it's very, very important to point out which Blomberg does not, is that the Gospels are quoted extensively by Justin Martyr, by the Epistle of Barnabas, by the Didache, but they're anonymous.
So they're
not attributed to anyone prior to this date.
You see, when I read The Case for Christ, it really painted the picture.
Case for Christ, right?
Yeah, it painted the picture that it didn't paint that picture at all. It paints the opposite picture, right? Like,
exactly.
I'm so confused, because this is okay. Random aside, what do you think's going on here? Do you think that Bloomberg and Lee Strobel are being deliberately deceptive, or do you think they're like putting a best case, like they're kind of rose tinted glasses, like they're, what do you
So
think's going on here?
I think Strobel has is just following the lead of the experts, right? So he's just going to believe whatever Blomberg tells him. Blomberg should know better. And the way that he has couched this, and I guess, I mean, how much of Strobel's interview with Blomberg is crafted for this particular chapter? When Blomberg says what he says, which here I'll read it again. When Blomberg says, there are no known competitors for these three gospels. Apparently, it was just not in dispute. Did he say, yeah, but we're talking about 180, 150, 180, 200 CE, and we don't really know anything before that. We just don't know, right? So Blomberg is either being selective, or Strobel is he's redacting his quotations, his interviews. So yeah, it's how it is. So
Yeah,
gospel attribution is a huge problem. And we'll talk a little bit about manuscripts, but is one of the things that is also important to point out is, in the manuscript evidence that we have for the gospels, which is very sparse, until you get a couple hundred years after they were written, you don't even start to see gospel attributions. I think the first time you see it is in P66, which is admittedly an exquisite copy of the Gospel of John that dates to about 200. But that's the earliest, right? It's the earliest.
Could you show us these 8 manuscripts that we
do you want to do that now?
Oh, I'm
You're
very
eager to get to that, aren't you?
Yeah, because
all right.
Because the manuscripts, I think it helps paint the picture of what we're actually talking about.
Yeah. So people should know there's a chapter. Strobel does a whole chapter on manuscripts. That's chapter 3. Do you see it?
Yeah. So maybe explain this website.
So maybe even throw a link in the chat, because I think this is something people should know about. This is the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. And at this website, you will be able to find pictures of, I don't know if it's every New Testament manuscript, but it's most of them. And it's all of the important ones. So, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of New Testament manuscripts. And we probably don't have pictures of all of them, but there are tons and tons and tons of pictures of New Testament manuscripts on this site. So on the left hand,
these are all the liberal parchments.
Yeah. There you go. So
this website
on the left hand
conservative parchments. No, I'm kidding.
On the left hand side, you'll see a bunch of filters that you can use for your search. So you'll see here, I didn't even bother clicking papyrus, because everything prior to like 300 is papyrus. I just said, show me everything in the 2nd century, start and end in the 2nd century, and show me all the gospel manuscripts.
Do you want to just click on that again, just to show? Click on the start again. Click on it. Not again. Sorry. Just click on the start, like where it says 2nd century.
So right here.
Yeah, click on it. There's no
that?
1st century.
I started. Yeah, look at that. So there's no 1st century. It's important for people to know there are no 1st century New Testament manuscripts.
Yeah.
None. There's not a single one. Okay. So, but when you put all the information in, this is what you get. Gospel manuscripts dating to, at the very latest, 200. Here is the list. You see this? What does it say here at the very top, David? How many results were found?
7. So you lied to me. You said there was 8. You lie, you liberal scholar.
I think some of the there's some I think some of there's possibly a disputed 2nd, 3rd century manuscript which could be included in this list, right? So here's I'm just going to show you what we're looking at here, okay? So P52 is our very earliest New Testament manuscript. Hooray! It dates to sometime between 150 and 180 CE. And this is the whole thing. It's 2-sided, right? And it contains text from John chapter 8. And that's it.
So wait. So again, let's break this down. When was John written? It was 90 CE?
90-ish, probably.
90-ish CE. So
60, 70, 80 years later.
60, 70, 80 years after Jesus had died, it's written in another language.
No. 60, 70, 80 years after John was written.
Oh, no. I mean, sorry. I'm going back in. So I'm saying Jesus dies, then 60 years later is 90 CE.
Yeah.
The original John is written, and it's writing about things that will happen 6 years ago in a different language, a different location on Earth.
Yep.
About things that happened 60 years ago. And then the earliest copy we have is this credit card size piece of parchment.
60, 70 years later.
Yeah.
And this is all we have.
Yeah.
This is it. That's all of it. So, and for people who are interested, this is from John chapter 18. This is Jesus appearing before Pilate. Okay. So that's P52. And by the way, this manuscript is at the University of Manchester.
Hey, that's where you got your PhD.
Yeah, man. That's right. So, okay. So that's P52. P66 is this.
It's even bigger. How big is that?
It's so what does this say here? Like if you look at the if we go back to this one, you can see.
Can you read Greek or is it
right?
Or you
I
can read Greek.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you look here, you can see the ruler here at the bottom. So those are centimeters. And I guess if you're a Philistine or an American, you'll
how many cubits is that?
Inches.
I only measure in cubits.
So like that's about 2 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And that's John chapter 19. Okay. So there's P66. But that's so actually I have to say that's it belongs to this manuscript. And this is an admittedly very impressive manuscript. So this is a codex from around the year 200. And it was once an entirely intact copy of the whole Gospel of John. That is without dispute.
Wow.
So, hooray! Year 200. We've got the whole
awesome.
Gospel of John.
Well, presumably P60. Oh my gosh, what was the first one we looked at? P20. P52. Presumably P52 would be from a whole copy of John, presumably, right? Or is that not how it worked? Is that a bad assumption?
I think that is an unfounded assumption.
Okay, yeah, all right. Because I'm just imagining, because now think about it. Maybe they will just write out certain sections, and okay, that makes sense,
right?
Because I have this perspective that it's like they're writing the eternal words of, like, I still have this Christian perspective. It's like, these are the eternal words of God that will live on forever. Like we're forgetting that a lot of these Christians believe that because Jesus said it, that he was going to return in their lifetimes. They didn't think they were going to die of old age. They did, or they got killed or whatever. They thought, so there's no need to write any of this down. And it was only until 370 or 360 or something where we actually canonized this, like sometime in the 3rd century or 4th century, sorry. We canonized the Bible.
4th century.
It was like, just like, geez, he's taking his time coming back. What is it? A day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day. Oh, that works out for us. So it's been,
God.
So it's been 2 days. So, lucky, but it's funny because Jesus did actually say explicitly, like he's like, I can't be any clearer. People standing here today will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And like he can't be any more clearer, but somehow he's being symbolic there, or they won't taste the second death, as in like,
Well,
who knows?
I mean, that's yes, that's a huge problem. So
anyway, so this is P77.
So, P77. Now you'll notice these fragments, these survive from codices, which are books. So they have writing on the front and the back. I work with the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are scrolls, and you only write on one side of the scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have writing on two sides, that's how you know it's a codex. So, but this is what you have. This is P77, and it preserves text from Matthew 23. Just Matthew 23. So
I thought you were going to say Matthew 23 Matthew 23.
I actually thought I was going to say more than that too. So,
but that's taking effect. That's great.
that's all we have. All right. So P77. Oh God, I shouldn't click that button. Sorry, I have to do this over again. So 2nd century, and it's easy because this is all we have from the 2nd century, and we're just doing Gospels. All right, so that was P77. Here is P90. It's a little bit bigger, right? A little bigger. Yeah. And it comes from a codex, so it's two-sided.
It looks like artwork from the early 2000s that would be on like a T-shirt if it was like.
Oh, I would wear that if it was on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
Damn right. So John 18 to 19. Thereabouts. That's what's text from we have preserved.
Hang on,
this
Kip.
particular manuscript.
Hang on.
Yeah.
We actually have someone who's actually solved it all for us. Nidhi.
Oh, good.
Trust me, bro.
Yeah, man.
The New Testament is legit. There we go. So,
thanks, Nidhi.
Do we end the stream? He just saw.
Probably. People are going, God, yes, please end the stream. All right. So that's P90. Next is P103.
So this is 2nd or 3rd century.
So we're not even sure. Like this could be a 3rd like we date these things based on the handwriting. So you can imagine that there's a there's a range, right? So it could be as late as like 220, 230. So comes from a codex. Matthew chapter 13.
Okay, so that was my question. Is like, so we date these. Is it primarily only with handwriting analysis, or are there like other, like, do we do any carbon dating with this kind of stuff, or is that not accurate enough?
No, the reason manuscripts aren't carbon dated is because you have to immolate the material. So people are kind of antsy about destroying portions of their very, very, very valuable tiny little bits of papyrus and parchment, as you can imagine. So now I will say that there are manuscripts that have been carbon dated, and the carbon dating helps to calibrate our paleographical dates, right? Cool. So when you're dating the handwriting, if you use that calibration based on the carbon dating, it's usually pretty accurate. So
where does one go to get a degree, or like get expertise in paleography? Like that seems like
there's places you can go, but it's very, very niche. So
I feel like it'd be like in a cave in Norway or something. Like it'll be like so niche that like you get trained by monks who only drink a beer or something. Like it'd be
my dirty little secret is that I don't have an actual degree working in paleography. I had to learn how to do it from people who do it. So I worked with people like Michael Langlois and like Daniel Stokel Ben Ezra, and who else? Mostly those two, but and lots of reading and lots of practice to learn how to do paleography. And I don't do Greek paleography. I'm just depending on what's been provided here by the Center for New Testament Manuscripts. All right. This is the last one. Okay. So Matthew chapter 21 through...
I knew it was Matthew. I remember Matthew it from 21. A video I made. I used this very image.
Oh, is that right? And look at this. Look at the verso side. Sorry, the recto side. No, the verso side of this manuscript, and how much ink has survived there.
Wow.
It's just very badly damaged.
Yeah.
But now I have finished. Congratulations. Everyone on this stream has now seen the entire extent of the manuscript evidence for the Gospels that dates to before the year 200, probably. And that's it. That is all of it. You will notice there is not a single fragment from the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Luke. Lots of John, lots of Matthew, and very small fragments. And that's it. That's it. And I think, I mean, I think this is a major problem. Now, I don't have reason to suspect that the texts that we have were dramatically different from the time they were written to the time of these manuscripts in the 2nd century. But importantly, I don't know. We don't know. Right? We just don't know.
I have a question, and I may have asked this before. I've asked this definitely on stream, but I'm not sure if I've asked you, but I'll ask again. Maybe the whiskey will change your answer if you have already answered it. But let's say, you know, in a few years we discover the perfect manuscript. It comes from before any of the epistles are written, and it's a new gospel. We can date it perfectly. It's preserved perfectly. It's more complete. It has all the other gospels perfectly and everything. But in this gospel, it has explicit information about how the body was put into the tomb, and then they decided to hide the body, right? And they're like, they took.
But why the fuck would they write that down?
But let's say they're like, hey, look, this is a secret. We got to hide the body. This is where the body is located. And we go to that location, and it gives the reasons. It has these reasons why they hid the body of Jesus. We go to that location, and we go and we dig it up, and we find there's a body in there, and it says this is Jesus Christ of Nazareth, blah blah, blah. And it's like, and it can be perfectly dated. Everything is like legit. It's as legit as every, like the holy grail of what apologetics would look after. How many apologists do you think would change their tune? How many Christians do you think would change their tune and go, oh, Jesus didn't rise from the dead? Do you like, give me a percentage, or do you think that, and I think, and how you'll answer will determine, like it further emphasizes my point from the start that it's a feeling, then you go looking for the evidence, not the other way around. I personally think not a lot of Christians would actually change their mind. I think it wouldn't matter.
No, I agree with you. I think that that there would be very few Christians who actually change their mind on the basis of this. I was going to say, David, that this sounds like a terrific plot point for a novel.
The next National Treasure 3.
Well, but I hate to break it to you. That novel has already been written, and it is called Skeleton in God's Closet, written by a Christian apologist by the name of Paul L. Meyer. So
Wait, what? So
Yeah.
what? This happens all the time. I haven't read this, but this happens all the time where I'll have a dream and I'll think it's real, or I'll read a book and think it was my idea. Like, but this I haven't read. I'm sure I haven't read this book. Maybe someone told me this, but like it's somewhere there in my subconscious.
Yeah, but it's just such. I think this just goes to show what a ubiquitous idea this is, right? So, but Paul L. Meyer, like I said, isn't a Christian. He's a Christian apologist, and he wrote this novel. It's actually like it's an okay. It's a pretty good read. And the story is about the discovery of a tomb with a body with bones in it, with an ossuary in it, and the titulus. For those who don't know, the titulus is the inscription that hung above Jesus when he was crucified. Here is Jesus, King of the Jews, written in
Sounds
three
like
languages.
A strip club, titulus.
Sorry. It's a strip club somewhere, right? If it's a porn site, I haven't found it yet.
Oh god, the whiskey.
God, if my parents ever.
Yeah, I know. So
the story is like they found a tomb and there's the titulus in there. I'm sorry, I can't say it now. And then there's like a written confession. Oh, we're so bad, us disciples. We stole the body and we hid it again, and we started this rumor about Jesus rising from the dead, but it turns out, good news in the novel, it turns out that this has all been an elaborate forgery from a very jaded atheist who's just mad at God, right?
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
So
it's like the there was that fake fossil in paleontology or anthropology.
Like Piltdown Man and
Piltdown Man, yeah.
But
there's something I wanted to share with you. I said that I wasn't sure if I should share this, but I thought it was. I told you that I was going to share it when I was talking to you about doing this stream. But last time we were on, I showed my family our stream together, and I said the funniest thing about the stream was just the difference in the start to the end. So we were drinking rye, and for 2 hours and 47 minutes. And I just want to show everyone. So this is the start, and I'll play the audio. You can hear us.
I specialize in texts.
We quite look put together. We look, we look all right. All right. Now let's just skip to the end, and you just hear our words a little bit more elongated.
Edited. They're not particularly reliable historical sources.
And you see my face is a little like that's really guys comment. Are we both slurring our speech? I think we're both very coherent, but I'm not a very good judge. So I think that's what's happening. That's what's happening here as well.
No, man, I am stone cold sober right now.
I thought you were gonna say you're stoned.
No, that's Neil, the 604 atheist, is probably stoned right now. But,
he does like a smoke. I've heard. So, Mythvision asks, has Kip ever checked out the first century novel by Chariton and Therese in book 3, chapter 3 about the empty tomb?
No. This is a first century novel about the empty tomb?
I don't know.
That doesn't seem right. But that's worth.
Every year we do the Derek Knows Everything Christmas special, where because Derek does so many solely interviews, I bring him on. And I just get him to tell me what he's learned throughout the year, so we get the whole of Mythvision in 1 year. And last Christmas, it's gonna be great.
If there is a first century novel about the empty tomb, I have to know about it. But yeah, I suspect he's probably got something wrong, either in the date or in the content, because that would be something. So, but the point. Can we get to the point?
Maybe it's a novel about. Yeah, sorry. Get to the point.
No. All right. So the point is that we don't have good attribution for the Gospels that date back before like the very late 2nd century. And what this means is that we have no assurance that these are the reports of eyewitnesses. And I think this just compounds the point I made earlier, that these were texts that were all written in Greek. They weren't written by people who witnessed the life and death of Jesus. They're not. They just are not. So
There's no, continue.
No, I was going to say, like, I mean, so we'll go through the book, but honestly, Strobel leans into this so hard through the entire rest of the book. His entire line of questioning just presumes that the Gospels are eyewitness accounts and that they're in effect historiography. And maybe this is a good way to kind of segue into the second problem with the whole first chapter by Blomberg, where Blomberg's whole point is to establish that these were gospel authorship is important because it's only through it, the attribution of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that you can trace these back either to eyewitnesses, Matthew and John, or to associates of eyewitnesses. Supposedly Mark was the translator of Peter, right? And Luke, the physician companion of Paul, who was also not an eyewitness. But this is how.
Can I just interject quickly?
Yeah.
So we're talking about like who wrote the Gospels? Are they eyewitnesses? You're saying probably not.
No, they're anonymous.
They're anonymous. They're anonymous. Yeah. But were they, based off eyewitness testimony?
And they were written in Greek.
Probably not. Yeah. So, but I feel free not to answer this because this is a bit of a topic going on at the moment. But how do you feel about in a few days? Not a few days. Soon. Well, actually, yeah, in like a couple of weeks. You mentioned we're drinking beautiful Nika, and it's like eating an oak barrel. The guest that I'm about to mention chose Lafroig, which I've heard be described as like kissing a cigar smoking walrus. And I would say that's pretty accurate. I love
McDonald?
It. It's Dennis McDonald. So
oh yeah.
So I wanted to ask you.
See, this is perfect. This is a perfect segue.
Well, this is what I do. What do you think about mimesis? What do you think about the idea that the gospel writers were trying to retell parts of the Greek, or they were trying to tell the story of Jesus based on like ideas, but spinning it with Greek narratives because they were taught with Greek?
So this is the second point that Blomberg wants to make, right? Or that Strobel wants to make in his discussion. And I will just, am I on page 20? Yeah, I'm on page 27. So here, Blomberg says, with regards to whether or not the Gospels have a theological agenda. So the presumption is made at the outset, and I think this is a huge, huge, huge mistake made by Christian apologists without any good reason and without any evidential basis, is to assume that these four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are just historical retellings of the life of Jesus, that they're biographies. They've been described by a number of scholars as Greco-Roman biographies, or bios is the technical term. And I think that's perhaps the the best way to classify them relative to, the large, fascinating world of Greek literature. But I just don't think there's problems. Like, the Gospels are kind of an oddity. They're sort of a unique type of Greek literature. And one of the reasons for this is, I believe, because they're based on either Jewish sayings or maybe even earlier Jewish texts. So they're Greek. They're part of Greco-Roman literature, but by the same token, they're an unusual category of literature. And importantly, they're not histories. They're not biographies. They're theology. The primary purpose of the Gospels is to communicate theology. It's to communicate ideas about what Christianity is. So I was just in one of the sections in this first chapter, where Strobel interviews Blomberg. He asks the question of the Gospel's theological agenda, and this is how Blomberg answers it. He says that Matthew, Mark, and Luke each had very distinctive theological angles that they want to highlight. Luke, the theologian of the poor and social concern. Matthew, the theologian trying to understand the relationship of Christianity to Judaism. Mark, who shows Jesus as the suffering servant. You can make a long list of the distinctive theologies in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So, Dennis McDonald, I think, has rather clearly demonstrated that there is a foundation within all four of the Gospels in Greek myths, that these are riffing on old Greek myths in the retelling of the life of Jesus. And I think he's right about that. And I think this reinforces the point, which is very important. This is Greek literature written by Greeks to Greeks. Now, the reason that's important is because the movement that Jesus spawned in his life and after his death was a Jewish movement. It was a sect of Judaism. And it's something about which we know almost nothing, because nothing has survived from that period. Very quickly, this movement of Jesus from the time of his death emerged within Judaism, and we know a little bit about its existence thanks to Paul, who is writing in like the 50s CE. So like 20 years after Jesus. So we know about it, but we don't know anything directly from it. And the reason is because in 67, the Jews en masse revolted against Rome and entered into a war with Rome that lasted for 3 years before the Roman general Vespasian finally crushed the Jewish revolt in 70 CE, and he entered the city of Jerusalem and he completely destroyed the temple and carried away all the treasures from the temple in the city. Most scholars, as far as I know, will agree that this early movement of Jesus, this Jewish movement of Jesus, which was centered in Jerusalem, died when the city of Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was destroyed. And what emerged after that was this international movement that Paul the Apostle had started to to found in these Greek-speaking centers in Corinth, in Ephesus, in Rome, and in Galatia. These were Greek-speaking Jewish communities that he used to forge this early version of Christianity, but this is all that survived of that. And it is a Greek-speaking movement, which is why all the literature was written in Greek. So
do you think it? Have you seen the stuff with like the sailing to an island in the Greek?
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like that seems
So,
like
I mean,
really.
I mean, I think so. I did I didn't really know anything about Dennis McDonald until Derek a couple of years ago asked me actually to work on a couple of videos that he did with Dennis, and he asked me because I know a little bit of Greek, so he wanted me to be able to kind of work through stuff that Dennis was saying and make nice visuals for it. So this was kind of my first exposure to Dennis's work. And I was particularly convinced by the way that he navigated the gospel retellings of the crucifixion and how they compare to the death of Hector in particular. I thought was pretty remarkably convincing. And in the bits that I've read of his work, I've got his book now, but in the bits that I've read from other portions of the Gospels, I tend to think, yeah, he's totally on point here. This is Greek literature. Significantly, the way people in the 1st and 2nd century learned how to read Greek was by reading Homer. That's how you learned how to read Greek. And that's why so much of Homer shows up in all sorts of Greek literature, including the Gospels. Now, I think importantly, though, and this is something like as I love Dennis McDonald, and I think he's totally on point, but it is also significant to note that as much as these are Greek texts, they are also employing old ideas from early Judaism within these texts as well. So I would say, and this is the huge problem with what Strobel and Blomberg are doing, where they take for granted that these are just straightforward historical retellings of the life of Jesus. No, that's not what these are. These are theological texts that are riffing on the Old Testament, and then through the lens of the Greek classics, in a way to make theological points about Christianity.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
You know, and at that point, you can't even talk about eyewitness testimony. You can't even talk about the historical Jesus, really, on the basis of what's in the gospel, just because there is no interest in these texts in history. None. Like, there's just none. It's all about promoting ideas of who Jesus was in an effort to emphasize what the writers thought was important for their individual communities. So, do you have a Bible handy?
I do.
Ask your question, and then good. Hold it.
Yeah,
hold on to it. Keep it handy for a minute. But
the Bible I used in ministry college.
Beautiful.
This is actually a painting by my sister-in-law of me, and I put in there.
And your wife and your dog.
My wife and very.
What's the dog's name?
Well, he was our last dog. His name was Butters. Yeah, he passed tragically. Right? Yeah, we do. His name is Manny, and he's a beagle. He looks very similar. But we didn't give him that name. He was his real name was Highwayman, but they called him Manny for short. So I don't know. We rescued him, kind of. But what I was gonna say, so this is my non-biblical scholar mind, like thinking about what maybe could have happened. I love psychoanalyzing people, times, things. I don't have any qualifications to do so. I just enjoy it. So when Derek and Neil came on the show, we talked about this very thing, and these are the differences between Odysseus 9 and and 10 and Mark, and it's crazy, right? Like there's a lot of like
it's incredible.
There.
It's incredible.
Oh my gosh. So this is a video. Oh gosh. There's a video here I did called Christianity's Lost Diversity. You can check it out on the channel. It's really, really incredible. What I would think possibly happened here. This is what I think could have happened, and this has no merit, but this is what I can see maybe happening. Is that Jesus was like some sort of a teacher, rabbi, like some sort of a apocalyptic preacher of the time, and he went and had an interaction where he set a insane man on the straight and narrow. He stopped him from being catastrophically naked and bashing himself with rocks. That story turned into, turned into the story of Jesus casting out the demon, and and then some mention of some pigs and stuff. And then the person tells it in this story of like, well, this is the Greek gods. This is what the Greek myths talk about. Well, I'm going to retell it in the style of that same narrative, but I'm going to add parts into the history. So you've got like this very natural situation turning into a spiritual thing through the course of like 40 years, for things to mythologize and everything like that. And just quickly, I have a special guest who's just going to pop in, if that's okay. Just two seconds.
Oh yeah,
is that all right?
Does he get a trouble intro?
Hello.
So let's take this as a quick intermission. Derek has been blowing up my. I'm too drunk to work to do this for you, Derek. So I was like, just come on. He's just going to spend
David
5
is
minutes
drunker than I am
to talk about this empty tomb that you were talking about.
Okay, dude.
Oh God, what the hell is this?
Okay, I'm not here to trick you. I am dead serious. But here's the problem. I'm on my phone, so I can't see. That's so fine a print.
He was actually in the bath when he sent me a photo of himself in the bath.
I literally gave him a dick pic. I sent him a little itty bitty Peter pic, and he you got to pay me for that, David. You got to pay me for that. Man.
So what does this say here? It says, can you read that?
Okay.
Surely.
Someone asked for examples of the ancient literature that contain. Well, let me just give you a summary real quick. Then I think it's worth reading. Yeah. So this is on Vridar, okay, which he's pretty cool. I really enjoy reading his stuff because he's pretty skeptical. He tries not to draw conclusions, but he's like really on the critical side. Chariton is an author, a Roman author, like he's writing a Roman novel in the 1st century AD. This is not about Jesus. However, in this novel, book 3, chapter 3, I think it is, and we'll read the section. There's a part where the characters in the novel named Chareus and Calirho or Calirho, however you pronounce it, that's the woman that he's in love. Chareus is in love with her. She gets like captured or something happens in the novel where she has a tomb and they think she's dead and they bury her in the tomb. Chareus is like, I don't want to live anymore. We're going to read that. Go ahead and zoom in. Let's read this. This is super powerful. I think Kip's going to be blown away when he sees this. Someone asked for examples of the ancient literature that contain motifs echoed in the biblical narratives. I'll post a few beginning Chariton's novella, Chareus and Calirho. I do not believe that we have any reason to think that there's any genetic relationship between the following extract and the Gospels. The similarities arise entirely from a shared cultural and thought world. It appears to me that the evangelists were drawing upon stock literary tropes when they related their respective empty tomb scenarios. A mourner comes very early in the morning to the tomb where his beloved was placed the evening before. He finds it open. He is fearful and confused. Others come see, but none dare to go inside. When the body is found to be missing, the first thought of the mourner is that she has been taken up to heaven as a living goddess. as per otherwise unknown variants of the myths of Ariadne and Simile, who were made divine after apparently dying. I have highlighted the passages that remind us of the gospel empty tomb narratives. One of the more interesting details, I think, is that the first to arrive at the tomb do not enter. This is, I think, in one of the gospels. Where's it at? I'm sitting here trying to see. Do not enter until someone else arrives later and does so. Compare the Gospel of John sequence of Peter and the beloved disciple. As for the date of Cheriton's work, B.P. Reardon, whose translation I'm copying, thinks it belongs to the mid-1st century CE. Now let's go to the blue. Cheriton's employer may possibly have been... Okay, you went really far down.
Sorry.
No, you know what? Let's just read the narrative. Because, look, he argues, okay, the tomb robbers had been careless in closing the tomb. It was at night. They were in a hurry. At the crack of dawn, Chaereas turned up at the tomb. Ostensibly, and now notice, this is not the only novel or story where at the crack of dawn people appear at this tomb or at a tomb. In Jesus' gospel, same thing. At the crack of dawn, Chaereas turned up at the tomb, ostensibly to offer wreaths and libations, but in fact, with the intention of doing away with himself. He didn't want to live anymore. He could not bear being separated from Caliro. I pronounce it Caliro, and I looked it up online. There's several ways to pronounce it, and thought that the death was the only thing that would cure his grief. When he reached the tomb, he found that the stones had been moved, and the entrance was open. He was astonished at the sight and overcome by fearful perplexity at what had happened. Rumor, a swift messenger, told the Syracusans this amazing news. They all, did I say that right? Either way, they all
keep going.
They all quickly crowded around the tomb, but no one dared go inside until Hermocrates gave an order to do so. The man who was sent in reported the whole situation accurately. It seemed incredible that even the corpse was not lying there. Then Chaereas himself determined to go in his desire to see Caliro again, even dead. But though he hunted through the tomb, he could find nothing. Many people could not believe it and went in after him. They were all seized by helplessness. One of them, standing there, said, "The funeral offerings have been carried off. It is tomb robbers who have done that. But what about the corpse? Where is it?" Many different suggestions circulated in the crowd. Chaereas looked toward the heavens. Notice something real quick. This is what the scholars like Richard C. Miller and others are saying. At that time, when the person who was a noble person, their bodies went missing after death, it was assumed they were a divine being. If it was a woman, it was a goddess. If it was a male, he was a god. And this is why in the Greco-Roman world, the Gospels, Greek literature, even though it's highly emphasizing Jewish materials, it is living Hellenistically. So Chaereas looked toward the heavens. Remember now, the body's missing, and they're all trying to figure out what happened. Chaereas already assumes divine. Looked toward the heavens, stretched up his arms, and cried, "Which of the gods is it, then, who has become my rival in love and carried off Caliro, and is now keeping her with him against her will, constrained by a more powerful destiny? That is why she died suddenly, so that she would not realize what was happening. That is how Dionysus took Ariadne and Theseus, or from Theseus, how Zeus took Simile. It looks as if I had a goddess for a wife without knowing it, someone above my station, but she should not have left the world so quickly, even for such a reason. Thetis was a goddess, but she stayed with Peleus, and he had a son by her. I have been abandoned at the very height of my love. What is to happen to me? What is to become of me? Poor wretch! Should I do away with myself? And who would share my grave? I did have this much to look forward to in my misfortune, that if I could not continue to share Caliro's bed, I should come to share her grave. My lady, I offer my justification for living. You force me to live, because I shall look for you on land and sea, and in the very sky if I can reach there. This I beg of you, my dear, do not flee from me. At this, the crowd broke out in lamentation. Everyone began to lament for Calero as though she had just died. Now, in the novel, you find out she's not actually dead. She doesn't resurrect. She's actually alive and was taken captive. And literally, like, by pirates. It's a novel, dude. And it's fiction. Wow. It's fiction. Cool. It's great fiction. So I wanted to throw that at you just to get your thoughts, because you're having so much fun diving into this.
I thought that you were trolling at one stage. Like, I thought, like, for sure.
I kind of left you hanging a little.
I thought you were talking about a first-century novel about the empty tomb of Jesus.
I knew that. I kind of clickbaited you with that. Yeah.
Now I'm pissed.
Look, I love you, Kip.
Awesome.
No, I mean, what Derek points out, though, is important for people to recognize that the missing body is an important, well-worn trope within, like, Greek literature. And, you know, the resurrection of Jesus,
Greek, Roman, you get Hellenized literature.
So, and especially Mark. Like, how does Mark end? The women come to the tomb. The stone is already rolled away. The body is missing, and there's a young man there who says, you know, he's risen from the dead. He'll meet you in Galilee. And then it says that they went away and they were afraid and they told no one. But this ending, and I think this is part of why scholars tend to think Mark is much earlier than Matthew, Luke,
right,
and John. You know, because this fits within this Greco-Roman missing body trope, right?
Exactly.
So, all of this. Thanks for showing up, Derek.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just underscores the broader point here that these are not history.
No,
this is literature.
It's literature. That doesn't mean there can't be, as you pointed out when you did the recordings just the other day. Well, the day before yesterday with Josh and me, or was the day before that? Either way, just the whole notion of, you know, you have verisimilitude. There is realisms, but like that does not mean these are histories. So it's really, really interesting. The whole thing is really interesting to me because I tend to think the empty tomb is complete legend narrative.
I do too.
But I have really played with the idea, if it isn't that, there's a couple different options that I kind of play with. And one of them could be the disciples really did steal the body. Not only because, you know, go ahead.
So I was just, so people should know, I spent a couple days at Derek's house last week with Dr. Josh Bowen, and this is something we talked about while we were there, and Derek suggested this. You know, I think there's some, you know, we need to give stronger consideration to the possibility that the disciples stole the body. And I thought about that, and I'm like, well, you know, when you look at how it's reported in Mark, think about this. It's an empty tomb. There's like a kid inside the tomb. When the women come to the tomb, and the kid's like, he's gone. Go back to Galilee.
Yeah.
Like this could be a straightforward report of something that happened and not have been a miracle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to say quickly, Derek, congratulations on getting to 100,000 subscribers. You're at 108 already.
That's
awesome, man. You got the plaque. Another thing is I wanted to share this image. I love this image because Kip, you look like a pirate, a metalhead pirate, and Dr. Josh looks like Bill Nye the Science Guy with that bow tie. I just love it. It's just like, it's so good. It's just the best. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing.
And Derek looks shocked that both of us are in his basement.
I know.
So good. But I can't wait to see those courses that you're doing. And this is probably actually a really good time to mention. I've just become a affiliate for
Yes.
for Myth Vision courses, and you have a course, Dr. Kip Davis, on here, the real ancient Israelite religion. So if you sign up with the link down below and you do this course, Deep Drinks will get kickbacks, and you'll be helping Kip, you'll be helping Derek, you'll be helping myself keep these kind of shows running. So if you do like what Professor Kip Davis has to say, you've got, this is, you can check out this course. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Kip, as we...
absolutely. So this is, the course is Real Israelite Religions, Facts on the Ground, and Propaganda in the Bible, in which I explore the way religion is depicted in the biblical text and extrapolate that and compare it to what we know from the archaeological record in what I think is a really interesting and compelling historical investigation of the people and the powers that promoted the various types of Israelite religion. So it's a history course, it's a religions course, and it's a Bible course. And I think it's pretty damn great. And if you buy it, then David can go and buy more bottles of Nika, because
honestly,
it's goddamn expensive. So
I will actually say, thank you everyone for the super chats, because like with all the drinks that the guests are asking for, we're running in the red big time. Like Dennis McDonald, $150 bottle, or $120 bottle. Kip, $100 bottle. Captain Dadpool, like $80 bottle. Like there's just
it's beer, isn't it?
It's
isn't
expensive.
Captain Dadpool?
No, he's wanting a special rum.
Hey, let me just plug this thing about Kip's course, because I edited that course, and it was tough getting through because I was there for most of the recording. Well, let me say why it was tough to get through. It was tough to get through because I was already there to hear you record a lot of it to begin with. Then I had to go and edit it. And let me just explain to people about this course, specifically yours. I love all the courses we do. Some I like a little more than others. Yours is not only amazing, but it's 18 lectures, and we calculated it like 14 hours of material at 4K. So it's like most of my courses are like 4 hours long.
This is why I've been helping Derek edit, because like he's so busy. I mean,
oh my gosh.
I'll help you.
Mine is also the only course with heavy metal in it.
That's true. That's true. It's heavy metal, and yours has got like clips from like amazing shows and stuff that have found their way in. So
Game of Thrones, Life of Pi, Walking Dead,
all sorts of good.
Yeah.
Well, Derek, thanks for popping in.
Thanks for popping in, Derek.
This has been a great intermission, and we'll see you shortly, Derek. I'm sure.
Okay, I'm watching the comments. Super chat questions. Help Deep Drinks.
Send your rent money.
David is scheduling a panhandling. He's going to panhandle next week if he doesn't get some help here. So, all right,
I
love you guys,
everyone. If you can subscribe, if you can super chat, I love everything. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome.
All right, sorry about that. He was messaging me like frantically, like getting me, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this, man. Like I'm trying to spit your case, like,
and you did it while you're drunk.
No, I got him on because I couldn't. I was like, I can't do this. Like,
okay.
So, and just quickly too, while we're here, before we jump back into it, you've got a YouTube channel as well that is fantastic, and you've got a Patreon people can sign up to if they want to help support your work, and of course, people can find you on Twitter. The funnest thing to do with Kip is just tag him in debates. He loves to just come in. You roasted someone so bad. Someone was. What did you say? It was amazing.
Was that the?
Someone was challenging me on about slavery, and then you came in and said, "I see what the problem is here. You can't read.
You can't read."
Yeah. So yeah, all the links are in the description, of course, and yeah, check out your stuff. Let's jump back into it. Intermission over.
Okay. So speaking, I wanted to talk a little bit, and you've got your Bible handy, just to give people an idea, because one of the things that Greg Boyd and Lee Strobel lean into hard is this idea that the Gospels are like these straightforward retellings of history, kind of like newspaper interviews with eyewitnesses to a car crash. I seriously think that they would offer that as an analogous description as to what's going on in the Gospels. And the point being that, oh yeah, there's dramatic differences between the Gospels, but this is okay because these are just different perspectives from individual eyewitnesses of the same things that are going on. And that is just the totally wrong way to read these texts. So just by way of example, like I've suggested already that these are theological texts. They're not history. These are very intentional retellings of the life of Jesus, maybe even inventions of numerous aspects of the life of Jesus, but in order to fulfill a theological model, an idea of what, at this point, what the correct observance of Judaism should be, or what early Christianity ought to be. So in this sense, you tend to get these varying pictures of Jesus because he fulfills these various ideals. I like to contrast in particular the way this works. The first gospel written was Mark. We've already said written maybe sometime around 60, as early as 60, could be later, but could be as early as 60. This is the very first this is the first constructed narrative of the life of Jesus, which incorporates various teachings of Jesus into a theological picture of who he is and what Christianity ought to be. So both Matthew and Luke just took Mark and rewrote it. And when I say that, what I mean is they took the Gospel of Mark and they literally cited large sections verbatim. Like they just copied it directly. And then when they encountered something that they didn't like, or something that contrasted with their own theological ideas, they made changes. And we'll talk a little bit about that if we ever get to the second chapter. But like this happens. Both Matthew and Luke are making direct changes to the Gospel of Mark, which fit their own theological agendas. But importantly, and you brought this up with Dennis McDonald, the critical thing to realize is that all the Gospels are theological literature, and they're grounded in these older stories. On the Greco-Roman side, there's numerous parallels with the stories in Homer, in the Iliad, in the Odyssey. You can see Dennis McDonald has cataloged dozens and dozens of literary parallels with what's going on there, and that makes sense, right? Because when you learn how to read Greek, you use Homer. So this is already ingrained into the writer's thinking. But there's more to it. You also have stories from the Old Testament. In the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew is trying to portray Jesus as a new Moses. You know, if you think about his birth narrative, he you have a reflection of the slaughter of the innocents, which only occurs in Matthew, but reflects the story in Exodus chapter 1 about how babies under the age of 2 were all slaughtered by the Pharaoh in Egypt. Jesus actually, only in the Gospel of Matthew, has to go to Egypt to escape, Herod's persecution. And then he comes out of Egypt, just like Moses. Jesus delivers his version of the law in the Sermon on the Mount, just like Moses. There's all these parallels that Matthew is intentionally trying to make with the life and teachings of Moses. And you can track this all the way through his retelling of the life of Jesus. But this is totally different from what Luke is trying to do. Luke is attempting to provide a more international flavor to his gospel, and in so doing, sets his focus on the lives of the northern prophets, Elijah and Elisha, from the Old Testament, specifically from 1 Kings 17 to 2 Kings chapter 13. And the excellent New Testament scholar who's now deceased, Thomas Brody, spent his entire career tracking the relationship of the Gospel of Luke in particular to these stories that take place in 1st and 2nd Kings featuring Elijah and Elisha. So just to give you a taste of how this works, Thomas Brody tracked the following from 1 Kings chapter 16 through 17, and compared that to Luke chapter 1 through 7, in particular chapter 7. So, for example, in 1 Kings chapter 17, you have a story of Elijah saving a woman who's been, doomed to die. And then in Luke chapter 7, you have a story of Jesus saving the centurion's slave. In verses 17 to 24, Elijah raises the son of the widow from death. In Luke chapter 7, verse 1 to 17, Jesus raises the son of a widow from death. Then there's kind of an interlude in chapter 22, which features the prophet Micaiah. In Luke chapter 7, it features the prophet John. Then in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 to 37, there's a story of an indebted woman. In Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50, there's the story of an indebted woman. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 to 38, you have a story of all of Israel, which makes mention of 12 stones. In Luke chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, there's the ministry of Jesus to various towns and cities. There's mention of women and the 12. So and I wanted to go into one of these stories in a little bit more detail, but basically what Thomas Brody is pointing out is that whoever wrote the Gospel of Luke had this story of Elijah and Elisha open in front of him from the Old Testament. And he's basically writing the story of Jesus to align with the story of Elijah and Elisha in an effort to present Jesus as like a new Elijah, a new great prophet from the nation of Israel. So, and he tracks this all the way through Luke and through Acts. It's pretty remarkable. So, but I think we should see, I want to illustrate in closer detail how this works. So you got your Bible handy, right, David?
Yep.
I want you to open to Luke chapter 1.
Is that in the New Testament or the Old Testament?
That's in
I'm
the
kidding.
New Testament.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. God, I'm kidding.
So, and we're gonna compare this to
Luke
what
chapter 1?
appears, chapter 1, verse 5. So in chapter 1, Luke begins his gospel with this large preamble where he talks about the fact that he's drawing from eyewitness testimony and how reliable his account is and how important it is to write this down, because previous accounts of the life of Jesus have been wanting in some way, shape, or form. So this is like a revision of what's come to us previously. And when you write a revision, it's because there's problems with the earlier version. I think that's important, right?
Yep.
So he starts with that. And then in verse 5, he begins his story. Now, if you could just read like the first sentence in verse 5.
In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. Abijah?
Abijah. Yeah.
Abijah. Yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you. So now Brody suggests that what Luke is drawing from is in parallel. It's a direct parallel with the story in 1 Kings chapter 16 and the very beginning of chapter 17. So 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 29 says, in the second year of Jehoshaphat, Achav, son of Omri, began to reign. He reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Now, a couple things I think that are important to point out. First of all, Jehoshaphat is the king of Judah. In the introduction that you read, David, it mentions Herod, who is the king of Judah. Right?
Judea, yeah.
Yeah, Judea. Yeah. Exactly. So it introduces Ahab, who is the son of Omri, who rules in Samaria. You'll notice in chapter 1, verse 5, he talks about a priest by the name of Zechariah, who is of the priestly lineage of who? You said Abijah?
Abijah.
Yeah. So in Greek, it's Abijah. Now, in Greek, the name Omri is Omri. And the difference between them is a single letter. So when you look at them in Greek, they're very, very similar to one another. So you've got a king, you've got reference to a king of Judah in Herod in Luke chapter 1, verse 5. In 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 29, it references, it provides as a time marker the rule of Jehoshaphat, who was ruling in Judah. And then you have this very similar name. Okay, continue by reading verses 5, the rest of verse 5, and then all of verse 6.
His wife, Elizabeth, was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were upright in the sight of God, observing all of the Lord's commandments and regulations blamelessly.
Good. Okay. So there's a couple things going on here. I'm going to read from verses 30 to 31, which follows in chapter 16 of 1 Kings. Now, Ahab did what was evil before the Lord. He was more wicked than all who were before him, and it was not enough for him to go in his sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. And he took a wife, Jezebel, daughter of King Yethabaal of the Sidonians, and went and was subject to Baal and did obeisance to him. Now, a couple things to note. First of all, in the story that you read, it mentions that Zechariah has a wife right at the start, and her name is what?
Elizabeth.
In Greek, it's Elisabeth. Now, this is kind of it's kind of flipped in the version. So at the end of the story I read, it says that Ahab took a wife, and her name is Jezebel. It's very similar. And when you see them written down next to each other, they look very, very close to one another. It says that she's the daughter of Jezebel, king of the Sidonians. Now, what it says what Luke says about both Zachariah and Elizabeth is that they were righteous and that they walked. This is important. It says that they walked in the ways of Yahweh, right? In the ways of the Lord. Look at what it says about Achav and his wife, Jezebel. It says, Ahab did what was evil before the Lord. He was more wicked than all who was before him. And it literally says, when it says that he was subject to the Baal and did obeisance to him, it uses that same word. He walked in the ways, the wicked ways of his ancestors. So it looks like at the outset that there is an intentional reversal by Luke of what the author of First Kings is doing here.
So, but so you mentioned that the spells the same. Just quickly, wasn't
Similar.
First Kings in Hebrew, and this was in Greek?
So I would suggest that what the author of Luke is doing is reading from the Greek translation of the Hebrew, which is fairly different, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
and what I'm doing here is actually reading from the Greek translation, so it'll be a little bit different from the Hebrew text. So, and this is part of how we know what he's doing, because it matches so closely to the Greek translation of the Hebrew. Even though, again, this is a translation of an earlier text, right? So go ahead and read verses 8 through to 11.
Okay. Once then, Zechariah's division was on duty, and he was serving as priest before God. He was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord to burn incense. And then, when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside. Include verse 11 or not?
Yeah, include verse 11.
Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing
Good,
at the
yeah.
right side of the altar of incense.
Good. Okay. So here's what the text of 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 31 to 32 says. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So he went and was subject to Baal, and he worshipped him. And he set up an altar for Baal in the house of his wickedness or his offenses, which he built in Samaria. And Achav made a grove, and Achav added to do provocations to provoke the anger so that his life might be destroyed. He did more evil than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So what's going on here, you'll notice a couple of things. I think the mention at the end of in verse 11 where it says that an angel of the Lord appeared where? Did you catch it? He appeared on the altar of incense.
It says standing at the right side of the altar.
Standing on the right side of the altar. And it's unfortunate. If you know Greek, you can see this. When it says that Achav erects an altar to Baal, it's the same words. It's the setting up or the standing of an altar to Baal. So,
whoa.
I know, right?
So this is incredible. So, okay. So
the writer of Luke is reading this text, and he's just kind of rewriting it, but featuring Jesus and, as we'll come to discover, John the Baptist, right? Like this is a foundational text for him. He's riffing on it. He's using it to construct his own narrative. And I'm making this point as an important feature to illustrate how we can't read this stuff as history. It's literature. It's the artistic development of earlier texts into a new story. But there's more. So read verse 13 through, I think that's verse 16.
Okay. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayers have been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John.
The name John?
He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from birth. Many of the people of Israel will bring back to the Lord he will bring back to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord, before the Lord in the spirit and the power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready the people, prepare the way for the Lord.
There you go. So he ends. It's very important that how he ends that verse, right? He talks about how John's going to be a new Elijah, and then what does he say? He says he's going to turn the hearts of the people back to God. Right? So, all right. Here's what it says in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 34. It says, now it makes this odd sort of turn. And it's contrasting. It's using this as a comparison of how bad Ahab was. It says, in his days, Achiel of Bethel built Jericho, or rebuilt Jericho, and he laid its foundations with Avrion, his firstborn, and set up his doors with his younger son, Segoav, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by the hand of Iesos, son of Now. Now, you're probably wondering at the outside, well, what the hell does that have to do with anything? I would suggest, in the first place, this is a narration. This is a very polite narration of child sacrifice. When it says that he laid its foundation with his firstborn, it basically means that he sacrificed his firstborn in an effort to provide him enough power and influence in order to complete the task at hand. Now, you'll notice this is an account of wicked fathers sacrificing their sons for wicked purposes. Whereas at the end of the passage that I asked you to cite regarding Elijah, what does it say about him? It says it will turn the hearts of sons back to their fathers, and of fathers back to their sons. So again, it's like a reversal of this terrible story, which takes place in 1 Kings chapter 16. And then at the beginning of chapter 17, it introduces none other than Elijah the prophet, the Tishbite from Teshbon of Galad. And he said to Ahab, the Lord lives, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, before whom I stand, if there shall be dew and rain these years, except by the word of my mouth. So I bring up this particular text as a way to illustrate what the author of Luke is doing. he's riffing off of these old stories about Elijah and then Elisha that appear in 1st and 2nd Kings, and he's using them in his construction of the story of Jesus. And you can see it clearly. It's particularly obvious when you're reading the Greek text. But I think even if you're comparing with the English with a careful eye, you can see, oh yeah. So he's deliberately constructing this stuff to emulate something that's earlier. So all that to say, when Strobel and what's his name, Craig Blomberg, go to great lengths to demonstrate that the Gospels provide eyewitness testimony to the life of Jesus, this is nonsense. The Gospels are literature. They are Greek literature. They're anonymous Greek literature that was written very late compared to the life of Jesus, and they literally had nothing to do with the actual life of Jesus, and were much more interested in providing force to their own theological points and their own emphases.
Wow. So I can't believe we're at 3 hours, and we're nearly at 3 hours, and we're only on point one. That's amazing. We'll have to do more of these. Let us know. Yeah. Do you guys like this kind of stuff as we're diving deeper into scholarship and we're talking about the apologetics? Let us know if you like it. Like, comment.
You got 50 viewers right now.
Yeah, I know. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's like and share and favorite and send this to your fundamentalist brother-in-law. But just Deep Drinks community is like the best community. I love you guys so much. But something I wanted to mention about, the only thing I had to mention about the eyewitness testimony was a problem in what I call logic. So, well, when I call logic, geez, this alcohol is affecting me. So something that I found really interesting, is they'll use eyewitness testimony and be like, the Gospels were eyewitness accounts. This is what they'll say, or they were written by eyewitness accounts, and so therefore trustworthy, right? The problem with that is we have like eyewitness accounts of, not to get political, but January 6th. And people strongly disagree about what happened there. And we've got cameras and videos and reporting, and people are, we've got a highly emotional subject, politics.
Yeah.
And people have just made up narratives out of it. Has nothing to do with reality. They're looking for things that aren't there, and they find them. I'm not even taking a side here. I'm just
newer.
Exactly.
January 6th happened in 2021.
Oh, isn't
and
that's
the
what
kind
I said,
of narratives that have been forwarded out of that, something that happened 2 years ago.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And there's camera angles, and there's like this is and there's different narratives, right? And these are from eyewitnesses. So, but something that so I don't think eyewitness testimony is like all it's cracked up to be. I'm not an expert, but however, something that I thought was really brilliant when Bart Ehrman was talking to an apologist, he mentioned the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith. The story goes, Joseph Smith was had an angel appear to him in biblical times, 1826, whatever it was, 18th century. Take it way back to biblical times.
In the promised land of New York State.
Yeah, in uptown New York. So, and he dug up these. He said, "I've written a third gospel. Everyone loves a trilogy, so go dig it up. It's in somewhere around your backyard." He dug up these golden plates. It had some form of ancient Egyptian on there that you could read with these special glasses like sphere stones, and he rewrote the this third gospel, the Book of Nephi, and then and Eli, I think. Anyway, drunk, and I'm not. I don't have
Lamech
story.
I think it might have been
anyway.
Lamech.
But these but these golden plates were like, these were the things that he found, and there not only were there 8 witnesses who testified to seeing, touching, holding, playing with these golden plates. When they left the church, they still said, "Yep, I've left the church, but the golden plates are real, like 100%." Not only were there 8 witnesses, there were 3 witnesses, including not including Joseph Smith, so 4 in total, that said they saw an angel hand the golden plates, or Joseph hand the golden plates to the angel. And I think 1 or 2 of them left the church, and still said they still agreed with what they saw. I think, like it's like,
as far as I know, people left the church, but nobody actually recanted from what they claimed they saw.
Yeah. So they're like, we saw the angel, we saw the golden plates, but Christians, the type of Christians and these apologists, they won't accept the golden plates. No way do they accept the golden plates or more of the claims of Mormonism. So for me, it's a double standard. For me, it's like, whoa. You're talking about 40 years after the fact, written by non-eyewitnesses and like written by anonymous sources in a different language. You're telling me that that's more accurate than like what the narratives of January 6th or the Book of Mormon, like that to me that seems disingenuous. So to me, the whole eyewitness thing, even let's say they are eyewitnesses, it falls apart. It still doesn't work. It still is not like an open and shut case. It's still not like, therefore, like, even, let's grant it. Let's grant their eyewitness testimonies. Let's say all 4 gospels were written by the 4 disciples. Like, it adds a bit of weight to it, but it's still, I still don't think it's, even if you get that far, it's not like a slam dunk you think it is. It's not the flex you think it is.
No, it absolutely is not. So, maybe because we're probably going to have to wrap this up and pick this up at another time.
Yes,
but maybe so we finished the chapter. Yay! I think the other ones would go quicker. But I think it's important too. One of the I'll stress this again when it comes to Lee Strobel's book. So much of what grounds his discussion and his investigation all is totally dependent on these 2 ideas. That the Gospels provide eyewitness testimony of the life of Jesus, and that the Gospels are reliable because the authors were either eyewitnesses or were closely acquainted with eyewitnesses, and critical scholarship says no on both accounts. I mean, I think we've done enough here tonight to completely deflate this balloon. This is literature. It's mythic and it's anonymous. It's serving a completely different purpose than biography or historiography. And I can say that when I'm drunk, and it would be even more forceful if I was sober.
Follow Kip on Twitter, and you'll see him if he reneges tomorrow morning when he's hungover.
Yeah, there we go. Hey man,
I just have
super chats.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's get through some super chats. We have a few, and you know, I really appreciate the super chats coming through. The Nitty said, the GD manuscripts, when I saw the real chart of completions, I was furious getting fleeced by the apologists.
Those are supposed to be apologists, I think, aren't they?
Yeah. Apologists.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's so it bothers me so much, like that they just get away with murder, you know.
Well, you hear, if people are interested, I did a documentary. I think it's still maybe the best thing I've ever done on YouTube. I did a documentary about Josh McDowell on my channel, and he leans hard. Most apologists lean hard into the sheer numbers. There's a lot of New Testament manuscripts. But what they fail to do at every turn is to talk honestly about the date and the contents of those manuscripts. Something else I should also point out, I haven't done the legwork on this, but there's Camille Greger, who's on YouTube. He is he's finishing his MA and just starting his PhD, but he is an excellent resource who is active on YouTube. He has been doing some work looking into a number of these issues with not just New Testament literature, but also with the manuscripts. Excuse me. He put together a chart not that long ago showing where the New Testament manuscripts that we have were found relative to their dates. And what's really shocking in that is you come to see that all the New Testament manuscripts that we have that are very early, they all come from the same place. So not only, like, how confident can we be that this is representative of Christendom as it was practiced in Ephesus and Corinth and Rome? Or is this just representative of Christendom as it was practiced in Alexandria?
Yeah.
And the situation is that all of these really early manuscripts come from the same place, this one place.
And you think about
Egypt.
the diversity of Christianity, like back before the canon. Oh man, Marcion and the it was wild.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nitty. Myth Vision Podcast said you guys just want to sin. Thank you.
Porn!
Like I said, like your porn, and I like porn, but I think my favorite tonight is scoffing. I went to Facebook, messaged David. So this is
we did
how
that.
you got on. Yeah, we did that. Right. Okay, so DJ Frank 68 said, "Why do no scholars seem to have an issue with supposed eyewitness accounts written in third person with an omniscient narrator?"
Oh, see, this is. I think this
Great
is
comment.
I think this is an indication of the power that apologetics has, because scholars absolutely do have a problem with this, and it's tragic that we don't hear more about it. Scholars on all sides of the spectrum are unanimous about the issues that the anonymity of the Gospels provide, about the fact that that the manuscripts date as late as they are. This is a consistent problem within scholarship that is completely ignored or just glossed over by apologists.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just, yeah, like you just said it perfectly. It's like I said this on a stream the other day, but like we went to China, we came back from China, and we're showing some of our family and friends footage of the Buddhist temples. And some of the Buddhist temples in China that we went to in Zhangjiajie, they had like a Buddha of the past, a Buddha of the present, a Buddha of the future, and they're all standing, and it's like, right, this one takes care of your past, this one takes care of your future, this one takes care of you now. And then there was a Buddha one, but I'm explaining this all to everyone, showing them all the footage of our holiday, and someone stood up abruptly, angry, to get a drink of water, and said, "Oh, how can anyone believe this crap?" And I was just like, and I thought to myself, like, dog, like, you kind of believe in like a God who sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he created that he couldn't circumvent. You believe in like zombies rising and marching on Jerusalem. You believe that like there's going to be trumpets that can be heard across the entire earth as the angels come down, and like you believe some whack stuff too, my dude. Like if you look at it from an outside perspective, it's all pretty bizarre.
So we'll get. I mean, it is astonishing, and we'll probably mention it at some point. But one of the things that Strobel says within this book is how much the Gospels don't provide details of fanciful or miraculous or outlandish events or occurrences, and I'm like, what? I think this is a product of how much we by and large, within Western culture, have been desensitized to what's actually in the Bible, right? What's actually in the Gospels. So when, a normal person heals a man who's been blind from birth, that's a big deal. But when Jesus does it, it's just, well, that's just Jesus. That's what he does. It's, So, but I think this is kind of, we carried that forward, and it's kind of ingrained to the point where we don't even see it anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah. And lastly, the last super chat is I killed Earl. I saw earlier you said, it's great that I'm live streaming, and I'm glad to see you in the comments again. It's great to see a lot of you guys, and it's only been a week, but it feels like forever. The Line is having a live stream calling-a-thon fundraiser for recovering from religion tomorrow. Starts at 4 p.m. Central. Help those who help birth brand new baby atheists into the real world. Well, yeah, if you're into that, go. I love the Line. I love those guys. So yeah, go. I might be there if I can. I might even call in if I can, and help raise money and fundraise for recovering from religion, which is an excellent organization. Thank you, Aikildo, for the $10 super chat.
So, will you troll the Line, David?
I might. I should troll the Line.
I've never trolled the Line before, but I've been tempted many times.
Yeah, that'd be great. We should do a group group one. Well,
troll the Line.
Yeah, the Deep Drinks community comes out to troll the Line to raise money. We should do that.
It's however, I mean, the money raised is the important thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know that back in the day, one of the most interesting calls on the Atheist Experience with Matt Delahunty was his wife calling and pretending to be a troll and be like, "Have you looked at the trees? Have you looked at the trees?" And he didn't know, and he's like, "What do you mean?" It's really funny. His ex-wife, but yeah.
I've often wondered. I mean, yeah, no, I don't know. I've often wondered what an apologetic would look like if I attempted to do one from the perspective of everything that I know now. Oh, maybe I
do actually want to do an atheist Bible study where we're doing a Bible study, but we're not allowed to say anything snarky. We're not allowed to say anything rude or point out problems. We're just to talk about the beautiful parts of the Bible. And
I could totally do that.
Yeah. I think it'd be good because there's some good stuff in there. I think it'll, I think if you're still sometimes, like, if I was in my angry atheist edgelord stage, I'd have problems with it, like everything. But I think I've grown up a little bit, and I think that I can get good stuff out of it. Same with the Quran or whatever, even though it has some horrible stuff everywhere else.
So I have to give a shout out to my my good friend Pat Lowinger from Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger, who is just tuned in because he is currently in the UK on an archaeological dig. So
damn,
thanks,
that is
Pat,
so cool
for tuning in. And Pat, I am eagerly awaiting the chapter that you promised me for the edited volume that I'm working on. So no pressure, buddy, but I can't wait to see it.
You heard it here first. I really want to connect with Pat. I've heard so many good things. Well, thanks so much, Kip, for coming on. We'll have to do this again. This is the longest stream we've ever done, over 3 hours, 3 hours and 8 minutes.
It's insane.
Well done for us.
But
in a few days we have Captain Dadpool coming on, and we have. Let me just quickly share my screen, because there's someone on here that I haven't kind of told everyone about. So over here, so we have Captain Dadpool coming on, Dennis R. McDonald. Let me just go to live. Sorry, Kim Bayer. So this lady here, she was I believe she was a Christian. I don't know. She might still be a Christian now. She's a musician, but she's going to tell the story about how she literally lost the love of her life. She had like a perfect relationship, and then her partner had a brain aneurysm, and it totally affected his personality. Like they were about to switch the plug off, and he woke up from a coma. It was kind of miraculous, but he became a different person, and they ended up getting divorced.
Oh my God!
Eventually, but it's a crazy story. Incredible. We have the transatlantic queen coming on, Arden Hart coming on, which will be awesome. Talk about her journey.
These pictures that you post of yourself in the thumbnail is this how you look first thing in the morning as you're recovering from the hangover of the day before?
I wonder if I should share it, but no, I won't share it. I have like about 100 of me just like like I just sat there, and that's why they all got the same jacket. We have Paul Legia coming on. That's why I've got the same jacket, and that's why I was like, I'll just keep wearing this jacket.
Oh yeah, man.
But I don't wash it for like a month because I just like hang it there and only wear it for deep drinks. And I'm like, oh, whatever. So yeah, we've got Paul Legia coming on. That's going to be awesome. Just so many cool guests. Matthew Monger coming on to talk about the Bible from Babylon, like how Babylon has roots in the Bible, and Dennis R. McDonald to talk about the Greek things that are coming on. But it's gonna be
all my buddies
fun. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun time. So subscribe, like, favorite, send us to your fundamentalist sister, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, man.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.